Okay, greetings all. Sorry for the delayed start, a few technical issues, just resolved now. Trust you can hear me okay. Welcome. And thank you, Hara Habab, for the introduction. This is the Wu-Sabat Outformation classes, UK, from All Eyes in Egypt, Midlands in the north. And this is the second part of the harvest and bloodlust and religion. And then next week, we'll sort of finalize this sort of subject with the Bigfoot class. So I think on the first part, we covered this section and we're dealing with, or got into the RH blood types. So we'll spend the remainder, at least, of this session on that section of focus today once you've done the introduction. Okay, let me move this to the start. Okay, so what we're going to do is start off with a positive affirmation, as we do usually with our classes, to help us connect with our ancestors, and we have a positive session for today. So this is Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, which translates as the affirmation. So I'm going to say that in the Sabaic language in the first instance, and then translate once we've gone through the affirmation today. The Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. Abdoe kaleh namazorat ufakur ame kasam un empa paut anuki jawef pa ashuk empa paut Wu kale ashuk kawun jawef neya anuki kasam un empa paut Wu pa paut kawun kasam un em neya anuki wahu ame pa paut Wu pa paut kawun wahu ame neya Nakuk kado najo ame kasam un empa paut Wu khabub ame mushachas un Nakuk kadur kawan kale pafef Nakuk tayur jawef pa paut Ame wase Ame tayarni Kawun lakei bakoe jawef pa paut Anuki abed bi nafashni Pa paut kawun anuki Pa paut kadur nakuk kadur Pa paut amul nakuk amul. Okay, so that was Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. And let's translate that for you. So we began by saying begin all prayers and thinking as a part of the all expanding. And then we said, I'm in the divine love of the all expanding, and all divine love is in me. I am part of the all expanding, and the all expanding is a part of me. I am one as the all expanding, and the all expanding is one as me. I can succeed as a part of the all expanding and fail as an individual person. I can be all that I want in the all expanding, as long as my want is to stay in the all expanding. I am never by myself. The all expanding is, I am. The all expanding can, I can. The all expanding does, I do. So I say that was Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, the affirmation. So just a quick test, as usual, if you're joining us for the first time, we just want to make sure that you can hear me correctly, or clearly, I should say, over the Om chant. So let's just do a quick sound check. So just launching that poll now. So if you do have any issues or problems, then if you can just let us know in the chat. So can you hear my voice clearly over the background music? And I can hear the background music clearly. Okay, if you're not able to see the polling screen, then you might need to swipe depending on the device that you're using. Left or right. Okay, seems that is okay. Most. Just going to do a screen check as well. So can you see the screen and the presentation? Okay. Let's launch that now. For those of you on Facebook, you might not be able to see what's going on here. So there's a poll being launched just to check the sound in that regard and the vision. Right, okay, so ending that. So let's just quickly run through the webinar setup for those who are joining us on Zoom, on the Zoom platform. We're not monitoring the Facebook chat until after the session today. So if you do want the full interactive experience, I think the link is in the Facebook section. You can just click on that. There's about 30 seconds to register, and you can join us on Zoom if you so wish. Now, what we got here? So basically on the left-hand side, you've got your audio settings. And if you need to control your sound, then you can make the adjustments using those settings depending on what device that you're on. If you've got some feedback on an issue and it's not a question, then you can use the chat facility. But you need to select panelists and all participants. That makes sure that your message is communicated to everybody in the chat. So you can use that. It could be feedback, so anything that's non-question related. If you've got a question based on anything that we're talking about today, then you've got two options. So you can come to us live. You just need to raise your hand. So click the raise hand button here, on your panel, and you can ask a question to myself and Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn as one of the student teachers. So basically, you raise your hand, and then what will happen is the host will unmute you. So one of the facilitators will ask you just to unmute your mic. If you've dialed in, then in order to unmute yourself, you need to press *6, and to raise your hand, you need to press *9. Once you are unmuted, you will obviously have the ability to mute and unmute yourself. So we just ask that you keep your device muted so that it doesn't cause you to interrupt the session today, and then lower your hand obviously after you've asked your question. So you'll be coming live and talking or asking that question verbally. If you're not confident or don't wish to ask the question verbally, then you can place a written question in the Q&A section there, and then one of the facilitators at a certain point will ask those questions on your behalf. If the question is not fully answered or you've got to come back, then by all means just follow it up in that section. We'll pick that up throughout the class today. Okay, just bear with me one moment. Okay, so we're going to do a short introduction, and the fuller introduction can be found on part 1 of this class, which is on our YouTube channel, and also on our Facebook page for All Eyes on Egypt, Midlands and the North. We can place the link for the YouTube channel in the chat as the session goes on. Excuse me. But if you're on Facebook, just check out, as I say, in the various different posts, you'll see the link to the YouTube channel there. So, very important, who is the master teacher? Well, that is Dr. Malachi Z. York Okran, born in Ghana, Takoradi, which is in West Africa, on June 26, 1945. And importantly, as I say, that part of the Akan tribes, the Iwe tribe, a group of tribes in West Africa referred to as the Akan tribes, and born to Mary Abba Akran York, who was known as Fatima. And those tribes are matriarchal, and so the importance of the mitochondrial DNA line or lineage is very important, because we know through nature's system and scientifically acknowledged today that your lineage only passes through the mitochondrial line, so you have to have a daughter to carry on your lineage. And so Mary Abba Akran York is not just a female who gave birth to Dr. Malachi York. Obviously, she formed and helped fashion that individual in her womb with intervention or interceptions in the genome by Parnatharu to birth, as I say, this individual or Warner for us in this day and time. So a very important sacred feminine in this day and time, arguably, as I say, with the day and time that we're in, possibly one of the most important in the last 6,000 years. And so, as I say, certainly she has to be remembered in due regard in our culture as one of our Salafu now. And the word Salafu means ancestors, as she transitioned on August 4th, 2012, as you can see in the detail there. So this is her in the crown of the clan mother. So this is as she's shown there. So we are a nation and a tribal set of people, and as I say, as reflected in nature's system, we are matriarchal. Hence, we have a clan mother, and then obviously we have the Warner, who himself gave birth to us in terms of what formulates the second resurrection. Yeah, so obviously us being reawoken, one may say, from the dead, because the interception in the genes by the Muadamu or Mukasu or Caucasians in that regard created a new type of hybrid individual referred to as the American Negro, and more so in the UK and Europe. The remnants of that, of obviously us now coming over here, has also birthed a similar type of individual, maybe referred to as imposter syndrome, or different types of names that it has today. But it's a new type of individual, as I say, who lost the connection to our story, our ancestors, our culture, so on and so forth, and was living in the image, or is living in the image and after the likeness of the beast by way of the monotheistic religion, which through their tones has an adverse impact, which we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later as we just touch upon the spell. So Mary Abba Akran York, very important individual, as are, I suppose, all of the women who give birth to maybe considered to be male or female teachers in this day and time, all designed to transform the fate of our people from mortals back into deities again. Now, his father, Al-Hadi Abdul Rahman Al-Mahdi, as I say, of the royal family out of the Sudan, linking back, as I say, to the Dongolawi tribe, which also ties into us as ancient Egyptians. And as I say, very powerful family and royal lineage, as I say, linking to Mustafa Muhammad Al-Mahdi of the Sudan, as I say, who we tend to mention quite a bit in these sessions, who was born 1845 to 1885, and was known, as I say, as the guide, say a master spiritualist, a Karama, who drove the British and the Turks out of Africa through a series of incursions into our land, and he drove them out, much like the many of the great pharaohs throughout our story have also had to do, driving the Mukasu or the Muadamu back across the burning sands back into Europe. And so it's a very successful individual. The Muslim or Islamic world doesn't recognize this individual as being who he is in their degrees, because his freckles are too close. A dark-skinned individual with woolly hair, understood, or true hair, or real hair, or bar hair. Okay, so moving on. Then we speak about obviously Isa al-Hadi al-Mahdi. So when we speak about the master teacher, obviously you've got the physical body of Dr. Malachi KZ York or Kran, but you have the etheric aspect of him, the 3-in-1, which we may touch upon today. Now, this individual in our story is referred to as Amun Nabab Araya Ahakhtar, and it's talking about a vehicle or a vessel in the renewal of our story that happens every 24,000 years. 1 land mile equal to for 1 year, so equal to the circumference of the planet Earth. And as I say, it's talking about a vehicle or a vessel which allows our ancestors to speak through in this day and time, which means to convey take a long walk on a short path. That means to convey a lot of information in a very short space of time. Now, as I say, you've never seen us, and I make this point many times in these sessions, a first world people digging up the bones of their ancestors by way of paleontology, by way of archaeology, in that regard, to find out who and what they are. So our story is renewed from above, hence why we use the word outformation. And when it comes here on the planet Earth, it becomes information. And sometimes in relation to obviously how this planet, clearly falsely maybe called Earth, has evolved, we also get information from beneath the seas. And so therefore we say beneath formation. Understood? So there are different types of information that shape one's physical being, as well as how they think and how they perceive the world. Hence why you see information is synonymous phonetically within a certain type of formation. So in a formation, information. And so in order to transform us, we need outformation, because we need stuff outside of the status quo in relation to, as I say, what has been presented to us, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, by the modern civilizations coming out of Rome, Greek, giving birth to the new Babylon, as they refer to it in their scriptures. As I say, has forces or causes a certain type of shape of individual. It shapes the mind and as well as the physical body of the individual. And so you need something from outside of that in order to transform us, because the information sources were based on their mindset, and because of the way in which they came up, being allowed into ancient Egypt as you would have it today, they came in, they were invited in, but took advantage of us, of our good nature, and then sought to overthrow us from the inside out, through clandestine operations by way of Alexander the Great Killer and others. Understood? And then once they had thought they had stolen the various different secrets and information sources, they burned down all of the various different libraries, etc., around the world, much like they do today when they try to hide the fact that their real origin and real story is on the many thousands of tablets out of ancient Sumer, which is Iraq today, but they bombed it and leveled it to the ground. So many of those artifacts, tablets, records, so on and so forth, have been lost, you understand? And as well as the fact that obviously in the caves of Qumran, excuse me, where they have found thousands of manuscripts over an 11-year period in 1947, they've still not released the truth of those to the world. So he likes to keep his story hidden, and anything about our story he wants to keep suppressed, to keep us down and have us still, as I say, worshipping him in his image and after his likeness. So the nature solution to that, or the feminine forces of nature's solution to that particular problem, is to send teachers to a people or race or nation, planetary nation, in this regard, referred to as ourselves as the all nation, in order to fix this problem and correct the issue. So in order to do that, the being referred to as monothe-istic is born through the womb of a woman in order to basically acclimatize in the environment and then design a doctrine or the cure or medicine necessary in this day and time for our people. So in the first 30 years, the combination was Isa al-Hadi al-Mahdi, and El-Khadir was the etheric part of that individual, who then, as I say, walked us through the various religious or monotheistic degrees by stating, I came giving you what you want, so you would learn to what I really came to give. And so in that regard, as I say, certain information was conveyed to cause us to be able to break the spell by mastering what could be considered to be the monotheistic religions. But all along, we were being fed or taught about our story in the midst of, as I say, dealing with correcting or setting the record straight around the religious degrees. Now, this combination ended with the formulation and release of the Holy Tablets. The Holy Tablets, which is a book of 19 chapters, was the bridge between religion and reality. This was the end of the correcting information that dealt with, as I say, what would be considered to be the basic or kindergarten degrees in ancient Egypt out of 9 degrees. And so that led to the combination of Malachi Z, Dr. York Okran, and the Etheric being inside still that formulation today of Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, which gave birth, as I say, to our story and what he really came to give, which is the actual facts, the Patarak, and the Master's Secrets. Yeah, so really from the year 2000, we are into our story. So in the second 30 years symbolically, so remember each elder is given symbolically 1 hour out of those 24 hours, symbolically those 24,000 years, symbolically 1,000 years or 1 hour, in order to convey information necessary that we need in this day and time. And so that combination as I say, has produced a significant, obviously, amount of information, taking you now into your story in order to aid your transformation from mortals back into deities again. So nothing effectively would be hidden, you understand? Symbolism would be explained, uncovered, as it was taught. And I say many books has come out in that regard. Now, obviously, the Muadamu and the Mukasu certainly knew of the various different prophecies. We've talked about this in many classes before. There's a new movie out, which I've not seen yet, but called Judas, and the Black Messiah, obviously articulating about how they've been looking for the rise of what they consider to be a Black Messiah. Now, that means something different in our culture. As we've explained in previous classes, in relation to the golden children and the interception of certain children being born, an interception of our genome or genes in order to raise our intellect to prepare us for the next stage of ascension, or you may poorly referred to as evolution, but next stage of ascension for us, as I say, to become complete beings again, where they classify that, as you see, as 360 degrees mastery of the physical and 360 degrees mastery of the esoteric, understood, or etheric side of ourselves, making us 720, so complete beings again. So that is our ascension pathway, obviously being aided by a number of things taking place within nature, from the dimensional shift, precession change 2012, and I say a number of other approaches which, as I say, are designed to aid our transformation. Now the devil intervened, or devils intervened in that regard, and caused, as I say, the arrest of our teacher, leader, president of our nation, leader of our tribe, on May 8th, 2002, as has happened to many other great leaders that we have had. So Elijah Muhammad, in fact, was arrested 60 years to that same date, prior to Dr. Malachi Z, Dr.York being arrested, and many others, as you know, have either been arrested, assassinated, imprisoned, so on and so forth. So it's a very dangerous job, one may say, to come and address the spell and tackle the spell that our people have been under. And no other teacher before him has really addressed or been able to tackle those issues in terms of bringing language for us to speak in this day and time, restoring back our culture and bringing us the fullness of this spiritual or esoteric doctrine from our ancestors, referred to as Wu-Sabat, the science of the Nagarnadu or Negroid, of which there are 9 different species of us, referred to as the physical ethers. Now, as I say, he came as a teacher, but oftentimes, as I say, we like to make our leaders or teachers holy men. This is how the Mukasu society teaches us, so we can tear them down when some error or mistake has been made or whatever, or they can pitch a certain error or mistake that's been made in order to bring them down, you understand? And so, as he said there, don't make me holy so you can find holes in me. So he's a teacher, and that's to don't judge the man I am by the by the etheric aspect that's the one delivering the information in this day and time. Yeah, so the Mukasu morals in this society are not our stuff. You understand? So this is something that obviously has been created by them for their vibration, and for, as we see, we've shown in these sessions before, for their overlords, who are nothing more than extraterrestrials, gave them a set of rules to live by, and obviously they have then now taken that and extended it to create various different man-made laws to rule this society, which has got nothing to do with the way in which we lived in tune with natural nature. So, for example, if you marry, I don't know, for Honorable Elijah Muhammad had some issues with Malcolm X, for example, for marrying 4 women, you understand, or 4 different wives, or whatever the case may be, which in the Quran, if they read it properly, is not really an issue according to what they teach, but they'll put you in prison if you marry 2 women, or a woman is married to 2 men. But on Love Island, I think on one of the sessions, the guy who was under 30 said he slept with 1,000 women. You understand? So the genetic confusion and problems that causes, nobody blinked an eye. You understand? But you marry 2 women, they put you in prison. So what the implications are for in nature for how those rules and laws work, and then, let's say, what is reality of the things that actually nature's rules, how they work, is 2 completely different things. They say man's law and they say God's law in their instance, and the 2 don't correlate with each other. So, as I say, you can weed is illegal, but as I say, you can smoke cigarettes, and they put on a packet, these will kill you. You understand? So they have good evil and bad evil in their society. Good evil is legal, but it's going to kill you. Evil obviously is illegal and can do you detriment. So how many things in our society do we allow, overstood, that cause destruction under the guise of so-called freedom, but you're not really free? So, as I say, this society is based upon self-destruction, moral deprivation, and things of that nature. If we look around the world at the way people are living, we see inequality, racism, which is started by, as I say, them and their overlords. We see, much inequality and unfairness in our society. But as I say, we put ourselves under the judgment of them by being here. And certainly, as you can see from the list of people on the screen, and you look at how they have fared, oftentimes, I say, it's not ended well. So our last real option, really, or solution, is where we find ourselves at now, the end of the world, or the end of the 6,000 year cycle, which is the end of their dominance or dominion or rule, bringing us, as I say, into a new cycle, a new 24,000 year cycle, say in the second half an hour. From 2000 to 2012 is referred to as the hereafter. So hereafter, in quote unquote, the devil's rule, or the Muadamu or the Mukasu or Caucasians rule ended, because they was given dominion by their overlords of 6,000 years, which we covered in part 1. And then with the incoming of 2012, which is the changing of the axis from pointing away from the center of the galaxy, where there's a massive black hole, towards the center of the galaxy. So the rise of the female symbolizes the rise of the female, or sacred feminine, back to power. That is known as the thereafter. Yeah, so the thereafter, as I say, is from 2012 onwards. So we're in the thereafter period, according to our reference or time reference as it plays out for today. So, go to part 1 to get a more detailed introduction. So I covered this in part 1, so I particularly want to go back over it just so we can get through what we need to for today. We are talking about racial issues. It says, no one wins the race in racism is a famous saying of the master teacher, Dr. Malachi Z, York, or clan. And we say it's not about racism, it's about race unity. But we have to touch upon race subjects today because we're speaking about genes. And as I say, we're only dealing with factual information, we're not dealing with race hate. So we must make that clear in what we're talking about today. But the way they kind of frame things in this society, oftentimes if you point out the inequality between the races, they make you the racist. You understand? Obviously, we deal with right racism insofar as we're proud of who we are and we promote that, obviously, for the betterment of all humanity. So race unity, not racism or salalism, as they refer to it in the Uzbek tongue. So we talk about in great detail about the who we are versus the what we have become by way of the choices that we've made in this society. And part of these classes obviously is to give you the truth about yourself and who you are, so you can formulate, as I say, a better way forward. That's the purpose of the teacher in that regard. Nupu, so there's a few terminologies that we'll familiarize you with. So Nupu is the science, when we're dealing with the science of nine ether, is the science of Nupu in ancient Tamaray, being obviously reimagined for us in this day and time. And you see the Safaf script here, giving, as I say, detail around the Nupu science, or the science of Nupu, in terms of the actual wording that you see going from right to left. Yeah, so Nupu, and from right to left, representing water in nature, as opposed to Zupu, which represents fire. And as you know, water puts out fire. So the opposing force, as you see, you take this N and you turn it, as I say, 90 degrees clockwise. You see, it gives you a Z, isn't it? Or a Z, as they say in English. Yeah, and get the forces of Zupu, yeah, which represent fire, and the amber light, so to speak. And excuse me, you can see that symbol of fire they hold up high in the Statue of Liberty in New York, being held by the harlot that they speak about in their book of Revelations. It's got chapter in the 18th chapter. And they see that as a statue of their liberation. Yeah, so the fire or amber light, as you see there in Isaiah 14:12, where it speaks about the being of light, they refer to as Lucifer, and then that matches up with Revelations 22, chapter 22, verse 16, which matches up with their Jesus, who has the same title, the bright morning star. So one is a symbol of living, and the other is a symbol of death. Yes, so 9 ether in death is 6 ether, as you can see there, and you see the lock, or the Zabas lock, which is cutting off, as I say, us from those 9 ether rays or sound, as you see, because sound is not just what a person hears, it's what is received from space and beyond. Yeah, so the cutting off of those powers, because Wu-Sabat, as I say, is like a frequency that we obviously are aligning ourselves with, and we are continually receiving cosmic rays, cosmic energy from stars that have long maybe passed or died, and some which are obviously still alive. And even in this society today, we seemingly make use of energy from our nearest sun, or our sun, 93 or so million miles away, which we call solar energy. But obviously in your star map in ancient Egypt, we were recording, as I say, the influence of 24 constellations, 24 constellations on the ceiling of the Temple of Dendora on that star map, understood, and how that related to the energies that we receive in here on Earth, being referred to as solar biology. So how those planetary bodies, suns, etc., have an impact on the biological systems of life forms here on Earth, versus lunar biology, which is dealing with some of those lunar bodies, and again how they have a biological influence on the beings here on Earth. Hence why the word lunatic, for example, is linked to the word lunar. Yeah, so this is an acknowledgement that we are influenced, as I say, by what is taking place outside of this planet, as well as obviously on the planet and beneath the planet, being referred to as sound. So, in the fourth cycle, the 9 and the 6, 24,000 years, the 9 and the 6 clash or come together, one may say, symbolically for us. The 6, obviously, which is synonymous with sex and represents the physical body, and then 9 represents, or is synonymous with mind. It stands for the mind must rule, or the body. They must dominate now, become more mental than physical beings, and so therefore we must move accordingly with where nature is taking us in terms of our ascension pathway. Now let's move a little bit forward. So the spell, if you're not familiar with it, as I say, is a hypnotic spell of ignorance. Rakei Shalel Nawum, or the spell of ignorance, spell of sleep, or spell of ignorance is sometimes referred to as. And in different eras, it's been referred to, as I say, in different ways. So the spell of a man is dealing with the forgetfulness, the amnesia part of this spell, which Wu-Sabat is designed to fix and correct. The spell of Kingu in ancient Sumer was a spell of religion, where we started to worship, as I say, things within nature, outside of ourself. And so now, obviously, you see in the various different monotheistic religions, which I say in one of the classes, we will show about the relationship between Mithraism. We talked about that in part 1, and how that links to Zoroastrianism and the whole Wicca practices and Druidism, and how that is, you've got a watered down version basically of that in terms of monotheism, today. And the day and time we're living in, as it's called in the Bible, the spell of Leviathan, which basically means to join onto the draconians, which is the spell of money. You understand? And obviously how money, the love of money, not that you don't need money, but the love of money, obviously people are putting that before the development of their souls. And so this, as I say, is causing many different problems in this day and time in terms of what people will do for money, and how they oftentimes will use the power of it to, as I say, cause people to sell out their people for the propagation of, as I say, living in the image and after the likeness of the beast, which one of the ways you see that is in this day and time, the proliferation of anti-nature behavior. So whether that's us promoting the kind of blonde hair look, which is the weakest hair type within the human race. So oftentimes we're promoting recessive genes or characteristics, let's say, and referring to that as beautiful, which clearly is anti the human race. If anything, you want eugenically the human race, if it's going to get stronger and survive, you want it to go in the other dominant genetic direction, as I say, as well as trying to move us all onto a similar vibration of the European or Euro-American, when each of different races are different, they have different food, they look different for a certain reason, and obviously now we understand that they have different overlords or extraterrestrials that have been responsible for their development, and therefore have been sent various teachers along the way, as I say, to give them a doctrine that they can adhere to help them on their ascension pathway, to help them to fulfill their potential. But what it's caused us to do is to see but not see, hear but not hear. So certain things, particularly in the language, which is why the language of Misbatia, or the Sabatic language, was one of the greatest miracles to be given in this day and time by Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, because it's helping us to realign ourselves with our ancestry. And as you know, within Wu-Sabat, there's always been two sides. You have the esoteric side of our ascension journey, which you're learning about, and then obviously the fact or the need for us to come together and live for and by each other as a nation of people. Understood? And so the two go hand in hand, because in order to master the esoteric aspect of oneself, you have to basically be able to manage your physical environment. So the poor righteous teacher mindset doesn't work. We were born in ancient Africa under the platinum, the gold, you understand, diamonds, if you consider that to be valuable, oil, so on and so forth. We were placed in the best part of the planet, and therefore our Nathari did not intend for us to be poor, so we must have been robbed or have it stolen from us. Anymore. So the reality is that, as I say, a decent level income, let's be honest, would probably solve most of the people's problems who are on this class right now, and most of the problems for our race. Yeah, decent sized income, and then obviously you can work it from there. As many may know on the call already, when we were at the height of who we were as the ancient Egyptians, say we worked 20 hours a week, no more than that. So we were able to manage all the things that we needed to do, obviously building construction projects, maintain liberty within our society, and spend a good amount of time for pleasure, rest, and, as I say, developing ourselves spiritually. So we work 20 hours a week. So it'd be good to be able to get back to that, but maybe that's not for our generation, but it may be enjoyed by our children or even children's generation, because there's a lot of work to be done. So, very important, just before we move on to today's session, for where we started off from last week, or broke off from last week, was the importance of the fact that, as I say, and this is no disrespect to our brothers of the Moorish Temple and Nation of Islam, but it's a point well made, is the fact that the spell was renewed, obviously with Nana visiting the being referred to as Muhammad, and the creation of Islam helped to renew the spell. And these organizations, let's be honest, when we think about terms like Christianity or Christianity, Islam, we think about Jewishism or Judaism as they have it today, which our people are under. When you think about the names of the gods, the books and so that they have today, which are only copies of copies, they don't have the original books anymore, so they can claim old as much as they want, but old is not original, so they don't have the original books anymore. And we're working, or people are interpreting with mistranslations of mistranslations. They're not even dealing with the originals. Mistranslations of mistranslations. This is what we're basing our soul on. When we hear these terms or these tones, they relate to a certain type of activity or behavior that has a fundamental effect on the way we think about ourselves. So if we think about Christ, what is Christ? Okay, Christ is a white man, excuse me, or depicted, or they decided to depict all of their deities as white. So it's a white man, and because they've depicted all of the deities in their religions as white, what is that saying to you as an individual who is not white? That is saying to you that you are under them. Yeah, you are a second-class citizen. You are under them. You are not as they are, as a race whose ancestors are in their image and after their likeness, and they perceive their God to be in their image and after their likeness. You are opposite to that. So therefore, you are under them. You are you are subservient to their doctrine or way of thinking. Understand? And that is the same in Christianity. It is the same when you use the terms under Islam, because no matter how much you protest or call yourself Muslim, even if you paint by numbers and you colour in and give yourself a black Muhammad or black this or black that within their story, in their minds, the Arab look or the red hued human beings, they are the ones who they perceive to be Muslim. You are other than that, and therefore you are subservient to them. And even in that degree, they make it known that Bilal was the Negro. Then it was the Negro. Bilal was the Negro. He was obviously came in, converted obviously to what they consider to be their way of life. So it doesn't matter what you call yourself. In their mind, you are not that. So therefore, you make yourself subservient under them in that regard. And the same is with Jewishism or Judaism as they have it today. When you are a black Jew, even though we can say, yeah, we were the original this or we were the original that, when a person thinks of those terminologies, they do not think of a black person. So again, you have given away, yes, race and these other things in and replaced it with titles and terminology and tones which makes you subservient. Understood? And today when we think about Christianity think about Christianity and all these various different monotheistic religions, you do not think of a black person in those. If we're being honest, despite what the great work that was done by the Master to in setting the record straight, to replace the images, the reality is that when the world sees you, you're playing second-class citizens. And let's think about this. In the Moorish Science Temple, Noble Drew Ali, yes, Noble Drew Ali is black, but then we look at the Holy Quran, Circle 7, there's a pale Arab in the Holy Book. Yeah, out of the Saud family out of Saudi Arabia. So that you've got another image of a red Arab or a Caucasian in there to keep you, as I say, reminding you that you are subservient to the Leban Salah, the white race. The Nation of Islam, Honorable Elijah Muhammad, part Oriental and part Nagaru. understood? But then who was the person that, as I say, they call Allah, you understand? So that is another pale Arab, understood? So again, using those, even those, maybe some of the blackest organizations, they still have that image in those two, as I say, separate organizations, which is basically a version of Islamic Christianity, you understand? A form of that, as I say, designed to keep us under or being subservient in these various different schools, as I say, called a spell of sleep or spell of ignorance, to keep us subservient, as I say. There was nobody to produce you as Nagar Nadu or people of color, black people, in various different hues, to people of a similar type always had to come together in order to produce you. And we are responsible for producing all other races on this planet today. There is no them without us. So who are we, or why should we be subservient to anybody, understood, on this planet? They're subservient to them in order to find out who and cultivate who and what we are today. That is a sickness, as I say, which the other races do not suffer from, who have at least a version of their own spiritual science that they're able to unify mentally under, and therefore unify physically. This is why, as I say, organizations such as this, as I say, were not touched in that regard, because they're still out there promoting the spell. So oftentimes you talk about the drug dealer, in terms of the extremes or the hypes or whatever within a society, but nobody talks about the preachers or the imams, etc., who are deadening the minds of our people in facilitating, as I say, that new hybrid that we talked about earlier, which was the Negro of the West. Any questions before I get on to where we're going to be today?
No questions from me, Nabab Ketni has at the moment.
Just wanted to read this quickly, because we are touching upon this today. So many of the secret societies of the world use symbolism, to represent their extraterrestrial plan. So oftentimes, I say, you do need to kind of be cognizant of the fact that these secret societies, whilst their plans are, generally speaking, considered to be adverse to what we are doing in terms of progression of life and self-preservation in tune with natural nature, do not make the mistake of thinking that these secret societies are not spiritual in the same, or esoteric in nature. You understood? They're highly spiritual. And as I say, their workings on Earth relate back to a certain extraterrestrials who they are trying either to ingratiate themselves to, or are in direct contact with. Obviously, in terms of the Pleiadians, they abandoned their Mokasu children, as you would have it, because they were just too unruly, and abandoned them. So obviously they found themselves in the hands of the Anunnaki, as you would have it today, under various different names, principally Nanar, of Genesis 5:1, Isaiah 14:12, who is the Jesus, basically, of the Bible. Hence why in the early, even pre-hereafter doctrine, the question was tasked to say, well, is it God as the devil? Is the devil God? So they're two and one and the same being as it relates to those monotheistic teachings. Now, as I say, it's explaining that obviously the doctrines of the Bible, Quran, monotheism, and Talmud of Judaism, you see the Hadith there of Islam, Madras, Sunnah, etc., are outdated, yet irrelevant for this technological age. So certainly in these classes going forward, we understand obviously we've got responsibility to explain certain things and break the spell but we also need to be talking in terms of up-to-date language. Yeah, we're not talking about angels with wings on their back, and this kind of idea that human life is the only life in the omniverse, which, as I say, doesn't match up to the reasoning of how life is propagated throughout existence. And so we need to get comfortable with the extraterrestrial agenda to understand what is going on the planet, and then to say how it relates to where we're going forward into the future. Okay, so let's move forward to get to where we were last week. So we were touching upon the food for the gods stuff. So if you've not got into any of this stuff, then please refer to part 1 of this class. Interesting stuff here. Bypassing. I think we were around about here. Yeah, so we were talking to you clearly about the interventions with various different extraterrestrials, and we were interested very specifically in Pleiadians, who, as we explained previously, had come to this planet prior and, say, interacted with various beings on this planet, particularly the more ape-like life forms on the planet at various different points. But when we talked about the Pliocene era, the word Pliocene really, in its etymological meaning, meant most recent. And so therefore we were making reference to the fact of their most recent visits to this planet, and how, as I say, the interceptions within the genome in specifically has led to the creation of the Muadamu, or the Adamites as they're being referred to as, or the Caucasian race as they may have it today. And interesting about the different types of blood types, which we're going to explore in more detail today, that we see upon the planet, particularly Rh positive blood types and Rh negative blood types. So this, we saw obviously the symbol last week that we explained, one of them being three interlocking circles, and how that is a symbol, one of the extraterrestrial symbols here being used on Earth, and that is symbolic, as I say, of the Pleiadian star system, and as I say, how it relates to some three sets of simians that were sent to the Earth by way of the Sirius star constellation, sent here as a test, and then were utilized by the Pleiadians, in order to, as they create three sets of individuals. Hence why you have the K Celtics, S Celtics, and then C Celtics. So those three interactions. So the with the white fur, the red fur, and then the brown fur individuals. So we get into that, I'll say probably more next week with the Bigfoots. But they led to the creation of three sets of humanoids, which then led to the Vikings, or the six kingdoms, or red kind of man, you understand, or mankind, or red kind of man, which is what the word Adam means. So the word Adam from the word Eden means red or ruddy. Look it up. Understood? So the kind red, or kin red, is the red kin. Understood? Yeah. And so giving birth to the kind of Celtics here of different types that we find today under various different names. And we understand they came from six sets of genetic pools, with the Pleiadians responsible, as I say, for the Cro-Magnon man, also known as the link to the creation of the Flugel rods as we find it today. Yeah. So again, we talked last week in some detail about the where the lines got split, obviously, in terms of, say, diapsid and synapsid lines. Yeah, so obviously we started off obviously in the waters as the reptilian or reptile lines, and then obviously from the diapsid was a much more aggressive lineage or line, as you'd have it with, as I say, the eye sockets aside had two holes in the skull, overstood, and that led or birthed a more reptilian aggressive line, which were all of the sort of dinosaurs, and say modern day crocodiles, different things of that type have come from that line, as opposed to the synapsid line, which is ignoring, as I say, the two eye sockets, one hole in the skull, and that led to more the development of the proto-mammal, as I say, where obviously we've come out of that line in terms of mammalians, so to speak. And so that combination of reptile and mammalian is a part of who and what we are today as human beings, and obviously that is represented, as many will be familiar on the phone, by the hippopotamus deity, or the acknowledgement of that in the center of the Dendora star map, where you see the river horse or the hippopotamus. So it's the acknowledgement that we are obviously part reptilian and part mammalian. And the interesting fact that certainly as Nagarnado or Negroids that we have to pay a lot of attention to is that, which is very different to the way in which the monotheistic religions have taught. So some holy book comes down and then is explaining to you about you understand the history or origin of where people have come from, because it's where the Mukasu or the Caucasian started to write things down. When you are now, if you're paying attention to what's going on, our story has always been in our body. So how we arrived here, how we got here, who was involved, etc., etc., is written in your genes. And it plays out every time a person has a child, if we're paying attention. So the facts, the actual facts of who we are, which is why the Master said, know thy body. Know the human body. Yeah, because the importance of who we are and our story and how we got here and who's responsible is all within, explained within that journey. And so to keep it factual, and as obviously we as Sapiens, we want to see confirmation, understand, as ontologists, to get to the root of where things are today. So you've got the different lines here, and this shows you this from Proverbs of Yaanuwn. We can see different lines here and how they relate to different star constellations. Yeah. So the fact that they had even chromosomes means that it enables, as say, splicing to be able to take place, because they've got even numbers there. As I say, the Pleiadians came here before and started their project, bringing, as I say, the negative or Rh negative blood type comes from those Pleiadians and certain groups of Draconians as well, or reptilians, who were Rh negative. So the introduction of Rh negative blood types into an environment that was progressively designed for Rh positive blood types now becomes an attack, as you see it labelled there, alien blood weapon genocide. So without proper understanding or the introduction at that time, because modern day science is able to detect these blood types, but obviously back then when they were being introduced, those blood types, as I say, would have detrimental adverse impact and effect. And if we know the story of the Mukasu, as you see from Parterax, I Was There, which was here, part 1 and 2, there's a reason why Marcy oftentimes referred to them, that he is a disease, or he is or the germ man, so to speak. It was not to be offensive, it's talking or understanding about the origin of where they came from, and that they were introduced into the genome, as I say, to wipe out or certainly attack Rh positive blood types today. The problem that they find today is that in order for them to be able to survive, they need to mix in with other races, certainly within a cycle of 7 years, in order to strengthen their defective and recessive gene types. Understood? So be it by way of blood issues as hemophiliacs, or now today we find with the coronavirus the need for blood plasma. So the secret societies, or the various different secret societies, are aware of this and therefore promote interracial mixing. The people on the ground maybe not so much want to do that, but they understand at least that they need to mix in, and certainly if they are to overcome, as they see it, the 6,000 year dominion or termination, by that being programmed by these Pleiadians into the telomerase. So as a species, they were given a certain time limit to expire, which although their time ended in the year 2000, it will take up to 2060, as I say, for the removal of, as I say, certain types of hybrids from the planet completely, as programmed by their deities and overlords. So that would be considered to be their end of the world. So the Pleiadians came initially, as I say, but when we talk about this 6,000 year Adamu, they came back, as I say, and worked with the beings from the Draco star system, which we know as the Anunnaki or the Anunnaki, to create a being in their image and after their likeness. That was the being 6,000 years ago. We'll talk about the designer gene, which we may touch upon a little bit later. So that coming back and coming together, remember the hybrids, as we talked about in part one, the initial hybrids, those white hairs, silver eyes, pale skin that they created, they tried to bind their genes with those hybrids, but it wouldn't work. Hence, they couldn't get that project to work. Hence why they ended up going to the Sands people in South Africa, excuse me, and then using the creation of beings by the name of Adapa, who was the male, and Titi, to bind their combined genealogy upon, and they moved them from Africa to Becca or Mecca today, which was what is going to be referred to as their Garden of Eden in the sand. So they use that to create the Muadamu, or the hybrid, because, as I say, the ones that they had initially created, it wouldn't work in that regard. So we touched upon, say, those in part one, and then moving forward, as I say, in this regard. So this is, as I say, looking at those kind of secondary aspects. You need to be clear that because obviously the genes are scrambled, then clearly there is confusion now genetically, because we as a group certainly have the hybrid or the Mukasu or Caucasian genes inside of us, and therefore have the Anunnaki genes inside of us as a result, which is interesting why the 3-in-1 being referred to as Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn is a composite of, as I say, the 3-in-1 in terms of the Morozaku side, which is Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. We have Thahutwi, which is the Natharu being, understood, which, interesting enough, the Amenababraya, that's what the Egyptians refer to him as Tahuti. So you have the Natharu side as Tahuti, and then Ningish Zidir is the Anunnaki side. And Ningish Zidir is responsible, or one of the geneticists responsible for the creation of the Muadamu, or the Adamites, to say, as the Anunnaki side. So the being that was sent clearly has the ability or the knowledge to know the nature of all three of those genotypes clearly within us. Hence, the being is designed, and then the cure, or Wu-Sabat, at least in this day and time, is designed to correct or bring us back in alignment with the Natharu as part of our own ascension journey. So it's very clear in terms of the descriptions, looking at both sides and lines. I say that we have a different doctrine, and as I say, the doctrine of Nupu, self-preservation, representing life, liberty, as opposed to Zupu, self-destruction, and decay and death, so on those sides. And so we have to mentally be able to separate ourselves and start to work towards, as I say, this ascension pathway, which is going to hit us back to our ancient deities. But many of us struggle. Maybe want liberty, freedom, so on and so forth, justice, equality, and all these good things. But we still love the ways of this society. So this is where we find ourselves today. Any questions?
No questions, Nabab Keknihas. On my side.
No questions.
Okay, so tactfully. So the planet was split up, as you know, before the separation of the land masses into two zones. Yeah, so when people talk about Middle East, and what they often don't know because they don't understand context, because when the master was explaining about, well, where is Middle East? Yeah, because what part does East become West, or even West become East on an orb? Yeah, so now showing, wise and exact who he is in this day and time by providing context for things that are used, but human beings don't even question things in this day and time anymore. But we understand, okay, well, Middle, West, and Middle East. So we understand at one point, certainly on the planet, that Becca or Arabia was the middle or the center of the planet. And if we go obviously from on the west side, which obviously, as you see on the slide there, America, obviously all the way around, because we can't show it here, but on the back of the planet, then that would be one half. And then obviously if we go to the east direction, then obviously that would be to the other half of the planet. And we see the formulation, as I say, of two different types of creatures that were split and separated by a force field, as I say, before continental drift, when the land mass was one, to enable, as I say, the progression of ourselves, our life form, to live in an optimum form, and other animal life, plant life surrounding it, who were herbivorous in nature. And we walked, as I say, having been around for millions of years, we walked alongside certain types of dinosaurs, as they refer to as great lizards. Yeah, so the two kind of those races arising or living on that side were ourselves as a Fafraye, Ka'a'u, and you had the Travadu, or the Indians on that side as well. So both natural nature races. Now, so Natharu is obviously our etheric ancestors, and the Most High, as people need to use that term, the Most High would then be referred to as Raye. Yeah, versus on the east, so that's known as the west or green zone. Yeah, so green zone there. And the forces of Zupu on the other side was the domain of the carnivores, understood, and obviously omnivorous beings as well, obviously who eat both vegetable and meat. Again, they have a type of humanids, yeah, so types of say Homo sapiens, early kind of humanoid life, and dinosaurs on that side. Yeah, but again, separated. You have the Tralu, the Aboriginals, the Mangalu, the Asians. As we know, the Chinese in particular, because of their links, excuse me, to the reptilians, have within those Asians, they have Rh negative blood types coming from that side of things as well. And then more latterly, originally, so much later down the line, obviously you had the Caucasus, obviously, who are pure carnivores in nature, similar to their ancestors who were carnivorous. And then obviously when you add in the Draconians, are carnivorous and also cannibalistic. Understood? So happy to eat, or certainly in their diet they eat their own. Human beings obviously form part of that diet, animal or humanoid, as part of that. So at a certain point, those the carnivores broke through the barrier that was set up, and then obviously caused some infiltration into the green zone. And so today, obviously, we have mixture. You know about the dinosaurs and their proliferation at a certain point, and then, let's say, a meteor shower, as it was being referred to as, was necessary at certain points to reduce the impact of the great lizards or dinosaurs, so the carnivorous types, who were basically dominating and eating all the food on the planet. So there's always been a system of regulation to enable our optimal life form to flourish. As I say, you see the two lines now coming together, and the confusion now in this day and time is that they're now, unless you test the genetics and test the behavior of the individuals, what is their nature today. So certainly children, if you or people born on the call, I suppose after 1970, if you run your tongue, for example, along the the top half of your top set of teeth, and you run them along there, you're going to probably feel those incisors, in the front of your teeth, or fangs that we have now. So progressively, obviously, maybe starting as a more herbivorous diet, now classified more as omnivorous, so being both meat eaters and plant-based eating. But now in this day and time, you can't even say that, because there's Nagaru now who like the rare steak. Yeah, they like the bloody meat now. You understand? And so, some of us more familiar with certain information, doctrine kind of raise our eyebrows. But we are shifting, we are transforming. And remember, every 400 years, the genes shift. So different characteristics that we would at one time said, no, black people don't do that. We don't do this, or we do that. Don't do that. Or we don't really have dogs and all this kind of thing. These types of scenarios. You cannot say that now, because you're seeing your people in those things right now. The vibration obviously have changed. So which of the genetic side are we feeding? Understood? So there are clear choices and behaviors to be made. I'm not saying that people can't eat meat, but obviously there's certain types of meat that obviously you veer away from on your way to maybe moving towards a more plant-based diet. And that's only for the purpose really of, it obviously has health benefits, but also the issue is that in aiding our transformation, you don't want something in your system which works with your genetics and your blood type that may block or hinder one transformation. So progressively over the years, the master said he wouldn't write a book on dietary characteristics, because people would follow it and it would make a situation where people just living in a perpetual state of guilt. However, we have seen through various different updates, as I say, what type of things to eat or that's available to eat, so on and so forth, that can work with this now mixed genetic structure that we have now. As I say, you've got the barrier, as I say, was breached, and so we have this mixture of the two different types of beings. Hence why when you look at the Dendora star map, which remember was a newly created star map where the planet got shifted off of its axis around 12,500 around that BC, according to their calendar. A new star map had to be created, and obviously at the center of that star map we see a recognition, at least to say, of those two different natures, in mammalian and reptilian coming together. Now, when we look at the migration map, as I say, we've shown this before, but it's worth certainly visiting again. So Pleiadians, as you see at the top there, responsible for in Northern Europe, so in Scandinavia as we see it today, encountered certain beings there and binded their genes with them to create the Nordics. We see extraterrestrials. So primarily when you talk about, some people talk about out of Africa theory and these types of things, which actually don't make a lot of sense. Speaking about evolution, even in their Bible, in Genesis chapter 11, if you read that chapter, it tells you when the world was of one language, that the Lord came down and moved, transported different sets of human beings to different parts of the planet. And so even there in their story, it's admission that extraterrestrials came in and have intercepted the original genome, or those Sands people genome, at different points, and this has led to say the various different types of physical ethers or races that we see on the planet today, different blood types, and then the consequences of the binding of their genes on them, different diseases and things that have taken place as a result. So Andromedans linked to Asia, Aldebarans are central European and the Germanic races that we see there. Interestingly, Syrians, beings from Sirius, as an Atharu, interception there, producing the West Africans, and then beings from Orion as Natharu. We know that Natharu, the word means overseer, so it's an attribute as well as a title. For the East Africans, so another version of us. The Anunnaki in Mesopotamia, producing, as I say, a version of a being in their image and after their likeness there. And then we see the Riskians from that root seed, the Sands people in South Africa, here all the way in Antarctica. And then more modern, the Mukasu, the 6,000 years, so it came together with the Pleiadians to produce the beings that we see there as the Caucasoids today, or the beings with leproma or leprosy. So looking at the star map in more detail, as I say, a drop of cells placed in the waters, obviously by the dolphin, transported here by way of the Sirius star constellation, dropped into the waters here, defecated in the waters, and then, as I say, left the seed in there to evolve. So we were men and women, as you would classify it as maybe today, and produced what we describe as the aquatic ape. So thrown onto land by tsunamis. The women who had larger lungs were able to survive in less dense water than obviously in the oceans first, and we had to live in trees and various certain life forms. So that was the early kind of version of us developing into the Sands people, or Nubans, also referred to as the Batahites. And we can see here, as I say, various different transitions where we've moved up in this landmass of Africa. Some of us obviously ended up under this term Wathebi in producing, as I say, the Malians, and we see, say, the intervention there, as we see in the table here, from East Africans here, so an intervention here producing the races that we see here, the nations that we see here, or tribes of people that we see here, on into us as the original Native Americans, or the Atlanteans, Anasazi also being referred to as there, where, as I say, you've got the two sets of America. Obviously we resided in more in North America and sent mixed seeds down to live in South America. Understood in that regard. So Alalantwi is another name for where that region was, but you can see, as I say, a deviation or a separation of the lines, and say, to produce another set of our type of people in a different part of the planet. Now, further up, we can see intervention here from the Orionians there, and this is producing, let's say, another group of us on into Natharu in ancient Egypt, as they were, as ancient Egypt referred to the Morozaku in that regard as Natharu, understood. And then, as I say, you've got a deviation here in the genes, which has produced, as I say, a number of other people that we see known today on the planet today. And clearly, the Atralu, or the Atralu there, or the Aborigines, obviously find themselves in this region of the planet. Mesopotamia, where the Anunnaki landed in Mesopotamia. So we've got, again, a mixed kind of, say, Nagaru slash or children of Natharu slash mixture there with the Anunnaki. I remember where some of them came back in, if you remember, back into ancient Egypt under the first pharaoh called Nama, which gave birth to the 46 dynastic periods, as they refer to it as, which, remember, is 23 chromosomes from Mesopotamian, and then 23 chromosomes from the African. Remember, they had to be reinitiated back in, but it gave birth to a hybrid culture again, where you're seeing us with masks of animals, various other things, which, as I say, pre-dynastic ancient, you don't see masks of deities and so on and so forth. So that's a new thing that came in with the influences, say, of the Anunnaki. Excuse me, coming back into, as I say, or the results of that come back into ancient Egypt. So again, some of those mixtures coming back in there, as opposed to pre-dynastic deities, where you see Ptah and others who do not wear masks in that regard. And then on further up, we see the later ones. We see the Draconians there on that side, and the creation, as I say, with the help of the Pleiadians, to create the Celtics, the Celtics, and the Celtics in that regard, which is the three different types of simian, excuse me, leading to sort of blonde hair, blue-eyed, the red hair, green-eyed, and then you've got white hair, white skin and white-eyed as well, or silver-eyed, and then later they gave birth to a more dark-haired, dark-eyed version of those hybrids as well. You can see, as I say, there are various different lines that's led to, as I say, here older barons in with the Germanic races, as you can see there, and obviously they still had that relationship, as you are aware, with Adolf Hitler, the Boys of Brazil project, and various different types of things, because they wanted to get back to the more pure hybrid, as opposed to today. Now we find a lot of mixed hybrids on the planet today, and that's why they want to get rid of the mixed seed hybrids in favor of the pure hybrid, the white hair, white-eyed, but are prepared to leave, as I say, the dark hair, dark-eyed hybrid, in order for them to mix in with the other more dominant natural races on the planet Earth, i.e. the Nagarnadu, the Travanadu, the Atralanadu, in terms of naturally occurring races here on the planet, as opposed to the Mokasu himself, as I say, who their dominion is coming to an end. Any questions?
No questions.
I have no questions.
So, as I say, various different interceptions in the genome. Excuse me. So we understand certainly the Nibiru, or the Anunnaki on their craft ship Nibiru, first came here around 450,000 years ago. We talk about the Pleiadians around about 250,000 years ago, and the Draconians around 100,000 years ago. So fairly, in the life cycle of the planet, so fairly modern. Say modern in our story. I don't say modern in modern stories, but more recent in our story. And as I say, we can see the type of shifts that have taken place and the interceptions in various aspects, as I say, of the genome that we're seeing here. So you can see sort of Scandinavia, and as I say, we know about the Pleiadians intercepting humanoids in this side, binding their self onto various different types of simian to produce the Cro-Magnon man. So when they're giving certain versions of their story out of Africa, what they are leaving out to make it make sense is the extraterrestrial involvement. Understood? So there is no movement of human beings just out of certain areas. Say, and the interception to different types of major sort of changes in blood types, genome, even diseases that have arisen. As you are aware, excuse me, that the analysis of the human genome have shown a number of different genes with no precursors on the planet Earth, and that basically is alluding to the fact, or means to the fact, that there isn't a life form, for example, that links to the growth or origin of those genes. For example, if you look at a chicken, for example, a chicken is the midway point where reptilians obviously came out of the waters, and eventually their scales became the feathers of avian life or birds. So a chicken obviously has scales on its feet, isn't it? It's a flightless bird, so it has wings, feathers, etc., but it doesn't fly. So it's the midway point between where reptiles obviously eventually evolved or grew or developed into becoming birds. And so there are a number of precursors, over 200, as I say, that they don't have precursors on the planet, don't have a life form that they can link back to on the planet Earth, so are extraterrestrial in origin in that regard. So, as I say, we talked about the various different interceptions in the blood types. Predominantly, the planet is positive blood types, but with the interceptions, as I say, of these Pleiadians and Draconians, certain versions of them, this is where the RH negative blood types came into play. Any questions?
Yes, we have one question from, I think it's a Galaxy phone. It says, "Hi, you mentioned all the other native names for all the other nations. What is the native name for Africa?"
I mean, it has different terms and titles. The thing is, when you're talking about original land, the only reason really to have a name for a land is because other people are there. So, we didn't really have a name for the land. If you're talking about the original Sands people being there, there's no reason to name the land because there's nobody else around. So, and this is what you oftentimes see, is that many people have named us or given names to us, either describing what we look like or describing what we were doing at a certain point in time. Because why would you name yourself as the first people? You don't need to name yourself, because what's the purpose of it, i.e. the land and the water? So obviously this is coming from people who sought to want to separate out for their own purposes, whether it's control or whatever the case may be. So certain names that we have, obviously in the new cycle, the people are being referred to as Afaf Reye Ka'a, in the sense, as opposed to Africa, in the sense, which is what, again, somebody else named us, Roman general, but it comes from the Arabic word farqa, or root, which means to divide and separate, but repurposed in a new cycle language and information would be afaf, which is from, rayay, sun, and ka'a, which is spirit, you understand? So of the spirit of the sun, you understand? Afaf, rayay, ka'a. The land itself sometimes is referred to as pata, mayay, rayay, which is basically tied into the three principles needed for life. So earth is the first one, pata, you understand? Mayay is water, and then rayay for the sun. So three principles needed to commence life. Yeah, so pata, mayay, rayay, you understand, where they get, or tamaray, some say, where the word Mary or Tamira and other names come from. So you have to give it a name then in a new cycle information, afaf, rayay, ka'a'u, or as I say, some refer to it as tamaray. Okay, any other questions?
Yes, there's another question from Selket, and it says, Rahobat Nabab Kaknihes, how did we as a race of people make the transition from our initial state, primitive, to being great pharaohs in Egypt?
Rahobat Selket. So I think you've got, remember we were transported from South Africa over to that region of Africa, which is, I suppose, more north. The reality is that clearly we have had extraterrestrial teachers along the way, and so they have helped us to grow and ascend with the various different interceptions to what they themselves have grown into. So as a young life form, we have had teachers along the way, and at certain points the Natharu have walked amongst us as human beings in order to impart certain skills, technology, etc., to aid our development. I talked about last week, I think, a documentary referred to as Cosmic Africa, and these different tribal nations, be it the Dogon, the Sans people, the more primitive nations, obviously are highly scientific but are still considered to be primitive. Understood? So various different leaders, remember, have been born, so amongst us, but then also within our own genome. Remember, you've had people that have been born through the genome who are part extraterrestrial and also part humanoid, who have been able to, with that connection with the Nathar, move our societies forward, certainly been influenced. And then you've got clearly human ingenuity itself and problems that have arisen and occurred that needed resolving and solving. Now, the key thing is, which we have to understand, which is probably different to the society that we live in today, is that everything that we did was to keep ourselves in alignment with Parnatharu. You understand? So, as I say, Wu-Sabat is considered to be is like a frequency, and so how we dressed, how we walked, how we talked, the type of food that we ate, the buildings and the monuments. One of the things why you call these cities, the Great Babylon or the Beast, is because when you look at the cities, it's although there are, some buildings are technologically complex, architecturally very impressive, there's no coordination. You understand? When you look at it, certainly in some cities like London, New York, various places around the world, there's no coordination. It's just a mishmash of different types of buildings, where when you go to our places that we had thought to build, what is it? It's a reflection of the stars. Understood? So we knew the importance of staying aligned with your ancestors to receive continually that outformation in the form of information, which helps us to progress our society. So we had direct, obviously, teachers in terms of extraterrestrial intervention, but also aligning ourselves, meaning that we're receiving or we are in tune with the frequency of Wu-Sabat, and therefore knew the best ways, as I say, to how to manage our societies. And if it, as I say, went left, as you would say, or we became out of alignment, then, as I say, the intervention with certain teachers or leaders to steer us back into alignment with Planetary is what kept us achieving the highest of heights and the greatest of successes. You think about Hatshepsut, for example. One of the reasons why she is revered is because she got us back to speaking the Sabatic language, or to re-emphasize that as, again, things keeping us in tune. So naturally, clearly, remember, there were 24, as you know, from Master Secrets, Birth of the Matrix, Master Secrets number 1, there were 24 tasks as well set for our race to achieve, from time travel to mastering the genome, to curing death, because you don't die from death, you die from a disease which resulting in death. So if you cure all diseases, at least from a point of view, human beings potentially could live forever by accidents, wars, and things of that nature, because you cure all diseases, or you're curing the deterioration. So we were supposed to master these tests. So tests are sent, at least in that regard, to help with our evolution. And one of the things as well is, if you refer to 18 plus 18 plus 1, the 37 genes of the mitochondrial DNA, you remember that one of the characteristics of the mitochondrial DNA was that basically certain interceptions could be hidden within the genome in a fashion that could be triggered interdimensionally. So, because remember, when they were creating that particular blood type, when they were creating the mitochondrial DNA molecule, obviously the issue was to be able to put the disease within the mitochondrial DNA of leproma, which would then be used, isn't it, activated within those Mordamal or Adamites, who they were using as a weapon, the Caucasoid, using as a weapon for the Draconians, so that when they ate this food, they could trigger the disease and obviously kill off a number of these Draconians, obviously that we were hunting human beings on Earth. So, and who the Pleiadians themselves were under, so they were originally food for these Draconians, and they sought to create an alternative source of food for them as part of that project as well, so they wouldn't be the ones having to be eaten. But in order to take them out, they sought to disease this food source in a form of genetic warfare, which led to a major war. The point being said is that the Anunnaki and the Inki coming together with Ptah of ancient Egypt to formulate, as I say, this mitochondrial DNA molecule, as I say, led to them developing that way to hide certain things within the genome that could be triggered, as I say, interdimensionally. So at certain points, as you can appreciate, there's been interceptions in the genome, which has caused that evolution as well. Like obviously the one 54,000 years ago, if memory serves me correctly, that caused women to develop the ability to speak a much more complex language by way of the FOX2 Pro gene, and then obviously men had the ability to draw, I think, 1,000 years later. So certain things were being triggered by way of interceptions within the genome, as well as experimental testing and things of that nature. So before the voice box was triggered, for example, the grey parrot, the African grey parrot, was used to test the ability of the vocal cords to work in a human being. So the grey parrot was used, and then that was triggered, where we went from, as I say, from a clicking type language in Khoisan, still spoken today by the Sands people. And as you can appreciate, when we were under the waters, that clicking language today of quiescent sounds like the way dolphins speak today. So it's as I say, it's a sonic language which was designed to work underwaters. Obviously, we've come out under the waters, and then there was an interception, as I say, in the genes to then force us then to speak much more complex tones and languages, which, as you know, is needed, as I say, to activate certain forces within nature, which is some of the secrets within the spoken aspect of our language, being referred to today as Mispatia or Sabaik. Any other questions?
Yes, we have a question from Asar, and the question is, the information given to us from beneath the seas, how does that relate to us as Nagaru, and where can one learn about who taught us from beneath the seas, and how does that relate to us, and is it relevant to us in this day and time?
Well, yes, I mean, greetings, Asar. So, I mean, yes, because remember, as I say, I think we touched upon earlier, remember all of the various different, our story is referenced in how we come around, and it's referenced in our story of how we're even birthed today. So remember, you read or you were taught, if you go back to the Holy Tablets in the first chapter, they explain to you about that craft ship Nibiru and how it has the ability to work in different environments. Understood? So obviously has the ability to adapt to different environments, air environment, water, space, so on and so forth. Well, when you look at the human body, clearly, the human body has exactly those same traits and abilities. So if somebody took a handful of salt and threw it in your eyes, yeah, you'd want to probably fight them because your eyes would sting. Yet you have the ability, for example, to jump in seawater, yes, and give your body a few sort of seconds. You open your eyes and you recalibrate, understood, to be able now to look under seawater. So your body has the ability to adapt. So the reality of the situation is, when you talk about how is it relevant to us, well, it is us, because that's where we came from, the seas. This is not planet Earth. Earth is what we're standing on. You understand? The planet actually doesn't have a name. So the Master Teacher had to give you a name to work with, yeah? Pata, non Kawaktaha, you understand? In terms of a name for the planet, because it is a water planet. It is not predominantly Earth. As we know, 71% of it is water, and 29% of it is land, and us as human beings occupy around 1% of that land mass. So clearly we had the ability, and still have the ability, if we knew how to, or we had the Barathri gland, that it would enable our shape-shifting abilities, understood, in order to access the water. And there are still beings that live in the seas today. So when you say it's relevant, it's because it's a water planet. We just happen to be on the surface breathing less dense form of water. And in actuality, if you think about it, in times past, and they talk about it in certain papyrus, is that at certain times Asar transformed into a whale, and then came back onto the surface of the land. And that's symbolic of, obviously, at certain points where major cataclysmic changes have happened on the Earth, be it a large meteor strike or so on and so forth. Obviously, we have gone back into the seas, clearly, and then when the time's been right, we've come back on the surface. Now, if we had the ability, for example, with our gills to breathe underwater, then that provides a secondary opportunity, isn't it, for safety, as opposed to necessarily leaving behind waterfalls or in large caverns that we've also done in the past. Or ultimately, in this day and time, which is a dimensional shift, is to shift dimensions. So if you're obviously not vibrating on the dimensional level that the catastrophes are taking place on, then you're not affected by it. As we know, when a universe is created, like Big Bang happens, it creates 8 tones. Those 8 tones create 8-dimensional worlds, which then subdivide them into 8 different dimensions. So being able to shift dimension, you can avoid vibrationally at least certain things that are taking place in your own dimension, and obviously being able to shift back again. So yes, still very important, and still there are a number of different extraterrestrials, not necessarily relevant to us in terms of interaction indirectly, but are still here today, having an influence and a say of what is happening on the planet today. So with all of the things which are going on, coronavirus and so on and so forth, I think what we still need to be cognizant of is that the planet Earth is still going through major changes right now in terms of what is being called, obviously, on mass climate change and global warming. These things haven't disappeared or gone anywhere. They're still prevalent and relevant for us today, that when those hybrids are gone, there are problems for us to still that need to be solved, at least for those of us who remain here living on the planet Earth. So beneath formation, long story short, or whatever, long answer short, is dealing with information relevant for the seas, and we have not explored all of that information, and there are certain things, obviously, records beneath the seas because of climatic changes that are being covered by water because of shifts in the planet, and clearly not that we need to uncover it, because you've got a master teacher by way of partner Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, who is giving you that beneath the formation information, because you're learning about things that took place in the past, which, as I say, are now unfortunately covered by water. Hence Atlantis, Partarak is one of that beneath formation type information, the stuff that's taking place beneath the seas, as well as you've got pyramids and various other things which are now underwater. Any other questions?
No further questions.
Okay, so excuse me, this video is a little bit long, it's 15 minutes, but as we know, Rh negative blood types and various things feature very heavily in the doctrine. Feature very heavily in the doctrine. Sorry, can you hear the music still? You can hear the music, huh?
Yes, we can hear the music.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to play this video, and then we're going to work through a few scenarios in the book to see if, just to make sure our understanding is cool. Yeah, so pay attention to what's going on. You may want to do some further, as I say, background research, etc., because sometimes different people explain it different ways can help make it a bit more sense. But this was a sort of, I think, the right level of, I suppose, complexity and beginner stuff for us to be able to explain what we're talking about here. Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Penguin Prof channel. Today's episode is going to be about understanding blood types, the ABO and RH groups. There are so many misconceptions about blood typing. Oh my gosh, you can eat based on your blood type. You can, check this out, you can find your perfect match based on your blood type. It's really pretty ridiculous, but a lot of people are confused because historically people had to have blood tests before marriage. In truth, this really didn't have that much to do with blood types as much as it had to do with disease, especially diseases like syphilis. But it accounts for a lot of the confusion that goes on about blood groups, and there are many blood groups. Certainly the most important and the focus of this video, the ABO blood group and the RH group. Interestingly enough, we share the ABO and RH blood groups with our relatives, apes, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas. Okay, so students are totally plagued by these donor-recipient tables, and they think that they have to memorize all this. For heaven's sakes, don't do that. That's what the Penguin Prof is for. Okay, we're going to go through what all of this stuff means so that it makes sense to you and then you don't have to memorize anything. One quick request, if you can, please donate and give the gift of life. One blood donation can save several people. Just a tiny bit of history here. These blood groups were discovered in around 1900 by Karl Landsteiner. He wondered why some people were saved as a result of blood transfusion, but some patients died. And boy, that's, I think, a really good question. He received the Nobel Prize for this work in 1930. Blood types are inherited genetic traits, so they're just like all the other things that we inherit, which does, again, make me think about this date by type thing. What if I can come up with a match by earlobe type? I mean, that makes about as much sense. Anyway, the thing that's confusing is that blood typing, the ABO system, is not inherited in Mendelian fashion. So it gets a little bit complicated because we have 3 alleles, and don't worry, we're going to go through that. I'm going to have an analogy here. Red blood cells look a little bit like donuts. Of course, they don't have the hole in the middle. They have a little depression. But my ABO analogy, we're going to look at donuts and sprinkles, okay? And hopefully we'll make some sense of this. Now, some people have donuts that have on their surface little sprinkles that look like A's. Okay, just go with me on this. We're going to call those people type A. Some people have donuts that have sprinkles on them that are little B's, and we're going to call those people type B. Some people have donuts and they're kind of greedy. They like it all. So they have both A and B sprinkles on top. We're going to call those people AB. And some people don't have any sprinkles at all. They are sprinkle challenged. They are the plain donuts. We call those people type O. That causes some confusion because some people think that there are O sprinkles, okay, but there aren't. Oh, by the way, different parts of the world, you may actually see this as type 0, which actually makes more sense. Okay, no extra sprinkles. These are the ABO phenotypes. These are the traits that individuals can express. So what this analogy means is that, of course, the donuts are the blood cells and the sprinkles are antigens. Antigens on the cell surface, and we designate the different antigens as either A or B. So the A people have A antigens on the surface of their cells. The B people have B antigens on the surface of their cells. The A and B people, of course, have both, and the plain donuts have neither A nor B. But what do the antigens really look like? Your textbooks in general biology and introductory physiology probably don't show you, but this is the Penguin Prof channel, so you're going to get a little bit more out of me. This is the idea. I'm showing you only the carbohydrate portion of the antigen. So there's another section that kind of anchors the thing into the cell membrane. The plain donut has a sequence that looks like this. That's the base unit. For people with A sprinkles, A antigens, at the end of the base, you add one more unit. It's called N-acetylgalactosamine, and that's what it really looks like. People with B sprinkles, the B antigen, instead of adding that, you add a galactose, which looks like this. Now, when you look at these, you'll notice that they're very similar in structure. This is an acetamino group, and this is a hydroxyl group. Even though they look similar, though, chemically they are very different. They have different properties. This group is a hydrogen bond acceptor, while the hydroxyl group is a hydrogen bond donor. So the point is that they do have different chemical properties, even though they do look rather similar. Okay, so the alleles in the ABO system, they're encoded here at the long arm on chromosome 9. And this, again, is not an example of Mendelian inheritance. So it might be a little confusing. There's actually 3 alleles that we worry about. But don't worry, we're going to go through it all. We're going to use a lowercase I to code for the base, that plain donut, okay? We're going to use a capital I with a superscript A for the A antigen. So that's the plain donut, and then add the N-acetylgalactosamine. And then finally, the third allele we have is the B antigen. So we're going to take that base unit, the plain donut, and we're going to add galactose. Those are the 3 alleles we have. So when you combine the 3 alleles, we're going to make all 4 blood group phenotypes. I know you want to see how this works. So 4 different possibilities. I'm reminding you again what this looks like. We're talking about A people. They have the A sprinkles. There are two ways that someone could inherit the A phenotype or the A blood group. You can be homozygous for A, and this means that both parents gave you this allele. So you inherited 2 copies of the information to make the A sprinkles. But you could also inherit only 1 copy. So one parent gave you the information to make A sprinkles. The other parent just gave you the plain donut information. Either way, if you're homozygous or heterozygous, you're going to be blood type A. Same thing is true for people who are blood type B. There are 2 ways to be B. You can be homozygous for B because both parents gave you the information to make B sprinkles, or you can be heterozygous for B. Only one parent gave you the information. If your blood type is AB, there's only one genotype that is possible. One parent had to give the information to make A antigens, A sprinkles, and the other parent had to give information to make B sprinkles. This, by the way, is a great example of why the ABO inheritance is an example of codominance, why it's non-Mendelian, because A isn't dominant over B or vice versa. So that's a really cool thing to notice. If you are blood type O, there's only one genotype that encodes the plain donuts. You had to get 2 copies of that little I. And that's how you inherit the 4 blood groups. Now, one more thing we need to understand before we talk about transfusions and who's allowed to donate to whom, and that has to do with antibodies. So we've been talking about A and B antigens. These are particles on the cell surface, and you have tons of them, okay, not just the A or B. The body is full of antigens. They help cells to identify each other, and many antigens are what we call self-antigens. They identify you as you. The problem comes if you are exposed to foreign antigens, strangers. If you're exposed to antigens that are not native to you, your body is designed to make antibodies against them. So you make antibodies against foreign antigens. That's the key. If you've never seen antibodies before, this is what they look like. There's this hypervariable region. This is the part here, as you can see, that binds with the antigen. It's very much like how a key fits a lock. The idea is that if you are exposed to antigens that are foreign to you, you'll make antibodies against them. If antigens and antibodies come together, you get a reaction called agglutination. And this is what normal blood should look like on a microscope slide. You notice it looks very, very nice and all the cells are evenly spread out. But in agglutination, the particles clump together. And that nice fluid liquid blood can become more like a solid and form clots. And this is bad. And this is why understanding blood types is essential when you're talking about transfusions and why this table exists. But now we get to the point where you don't have to memorize this anymore. All you have to understand is that no foreign antigens are allowed. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all 4 blood types, we're going to mix them with the other blood types, and we're going to understand what happens and why some mixes are allowed and some are not. So for a person who has antigen A, the B antigen is foreign, and they have antibodies against the B antigen. So we're going to mix this blood with blood type A, and of course there's no problem, right? That's their blood type. But if that A person gets transfused with a blood sample that contains B antigens, you got a problem, because that B antigen will combine with the anti-B antibodies and the blood clump. So that is not allowed. If you transfuse with AB blood, that's also a problem. The A is okay, but remember, they have B too. So that B is bad and causes the blood to clump. Now, why can you transfuse an A person with O blood? The answer hopefully makes sense to you now. This O is the plain donut. It doesn't have any antigens, so you don't make antibodies against it. So O blood is okay, perfectly fine. What about B blood? Now, the person that has B antigens is sensitive to and makes antibodies against A antigens. So if you have a B patient and you transfuse A blood, not good. You're going to get clumping. A B person with B blood obviously is okay. That's their blood type. AB is not okay because that A is foreign. And O blood is fine. That's just a plain donut. What about AB? The AB person has antigens A and B, and so they don't make antibodies against either. So AB blood can be transfused with all 4 blood types because they got it all. What about O? O individuals have antibodies against the A antigen because those are foreign, and the B antigen because those are foreign too. So you can't give an O person A blood, and you can't give an O person B blood or AB blood. Oh my gosh, that's a double whammy. You can only give O blood to an O person. So all that you have to remember is that you can't give foreign antigens to someone. And it should make sense now that the type AB is the universal recipient because you can't give them anything that they don't already have. And type O is the universal donor because they are the plain donuts and they don't excite anybody's immune system. Okay, all we got left is the Rh antigen, sometimes called the D antigen. This one's going to be really easy because it's inherited in Mendelian fashion. And by the way, named for the rhesus macaque, in which a lot of early studies were done. The Rh antigen is inherited in Mendelian fashion. You'll be excited to know that. If you're not excited, I have a video on Mendelian genetics, fun with cats and peas. So if I run through this a little bit fast and you're confused with the vocabulary, check that out. I'll put the link in the description bar below. We're going to look at the different options. There are only 3, as is typical for Mendelian genetics. Individuals who are homozygous dominant, capital R, they express the Rh antigen on their red blood cells. Individuals who are heterozygous, right, that dominant one will mask the recessive one. Those individuals are also Rh positive. The only way to not express the Rh antigen is to be homozygous recessive. These are the different possibilities, and I just wrote them out so you can see that only individuals who are homozygous recessive will not express the Rh antigen on their blood cells. Everybody else will. Now, the medical importance of this is shown here. If you have an Rh negative woman and an Rh positive man and they conceive a child. Oh, look, she's so cute. She's all like cuddly up against him. He's so positive. Anyway, so I made them both homozygous for their respective Rh types. So she's homozygous recessive. He's homozygous dominant. Their fetus will be heterozygous. So now look at what's happening. You have an Rh negative woman carrying an Rh positive fetus. Now, antibodies flow in one direction from the mother's body across the placenta to the fetus. So it seems a little strange that the Rh antigen being expressed on the fetal red blood cells is not, in a sense, seen by the mother's body. So usually that doesn't occur until the last trimester or usually birth, where there's hemorrhaging and the mixing of blood. And at that point, the mother's body sees the Rh antigen for the first time. And you know what happens when you get a foreign antigen? You make antibodies against it. So from here on out, the mother will make antibodies against the Rh antigen for the rest of her life. She is what we call sensitized. Now, up to this point, there's actually no problem. The problem comes in subsequent pregnancies. If this Rh negative woman conceives another Rh positive child, now the situation is different because she is sensitized against Rh, and the antibodies that she makes will flow across the placenta to the fetus and will cause what is called rhesus disease or hemolytic disease of the newborn. And that can be catastrophic. Now, there's good news. The percent of individuals on the planet who are Rh negative is relatively small. These are data from the US, but it's similar around the world. There's even more good news, though. There is a treatment called RhoGAM. You can see here when it is administered, and this will actually bind up and block the mother's antibodies and prevent them from binding to the blood cells of the fetus. So that's really good news. A lot of information. As always, I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for visiting the Penguin Prof channel. As always, I ask for your support. Please click those buttons, like, share, and subscribe. Join me on Facebook, follow on Twitter. Good luck. Hello, and welcome to the Penguin Prof.
So hopefully that gives some understanding. Let's just make sure we're in the right place. Just bear with me 1 second.
Channel.
Right, okay. So I think that's pretty clear. I should give you an understanding of how the different blood types, and clearly obviously O is a universal blood type because it obviously doesn't have the antigens, and as I say, more naturally occurring life forms on the planet, certainly green zone life forms were RH positive. As I say, the introduction of the RH negative came by way of the Pleiadians and, as I say, certain groups of reptilians from the Draco star constellation, introducing that, I suppose, into the genome. Now, clearly, with the interjection of this, and as it's expressed, you saw it there as a weaponized situation, because obviously them releasing or producing by way of, I suppose, Cro-Magnon man, females who had this type of blood type, and then sending them out into the world to mix in with other different races, obviously is introducing this danger that potentially, as I say, these RH negative blood types can affect, obviously, children being born into the womb. Now, clearly, as I think was being expressed in the video, I think it obviously expressed that clearly if you do have a scenario, as I say, where the mother is RH negative, then it's the exchange of blood at a certain point that can sensitize the mother to produce antibodies, clearly, or as RH positive antibodies. Now, I think in here it talks about the last trimester of the birthing process, but it can also happen with abortions or ectopic pregnancies as well. So any time there's some kind of rupture that may cause, as I say, the baby's sort of blood to enter in or mix, let's say, with the woman's blood, then she could become sensitized to that blood type, obviously, from the exchange of blood that way. So generally speaking, during the pregnancy, not generally, but it happens in the pregnancy, the blood, obviously, as explained, only goes one way. But if something happens, as I say, like in the third trimester, or, as I say, terminating pregnancies or ectopic pregnancies, then there can be an exchange of blood, which can also cause that sensitization. So thinking back those, thousands of years ago, they didn't have this obviously complex analytical tools that we have today, and certainly didn't have what would be RH immune globulin in the same, which you saw there as one of the products as ROGAM, in order to suppress, as I say, the female's antibodies where this may be problematic. So at that time, obviously, it being introduced into the genome in that way would cause serious problems, obviously, thousands of years ago, and this is what it was weaponized to do. As you know, the Pleiadians created a situation where they made the females with larger vaginas and the males with smaller phallus, so that the male would not be able to satisfy the female, although size is not always important. Obviously, I'm a man speaking, so maybe that's not as relevant as it needs to be, but size is not as important, meaning to say that obviously the nerve endings in the vagina only go up to 3 inches. But somebody with obviously small genitalia may not be able to satisfy the woman, which would then cause her then to seek out other races in order to mix with, which was all part of their plan. So you can see by design what it's forcing them to do, because they didn't have the development of millions of years to perfect their particular design, and also it's based on them. So you're living on a planet which is in fairly close proximity to a powerful enough star. So they talk about third rock from the sun, but we count it from the outside in. So we talk about it being the sixth planet. But obviously the Pleiadians, based on their look, came from a star constellation where they were particularly far away from the sun. Now, one of the things that's not explained is what is the purpose of RH. Now, this is something that's still being uncovered. Maybe something that the master will go into a bit further along. But some of the studies have talked about RH being responsible for or related to the removal of carbon dioxide from the human body. Now, if that is the case, then you can see why it has some significance in relation to the Pleiadians, who are very pale in look versus obviously ourselves, who process oxygen in an optimum way, obviously, and are burning black in that regard. So if not known, and clearly with all the different blood types, when you've got one set of people on the planet who are clearly of the same blood type, because there's been no interceptions, it's not really a problem or an issue. When you start getting different races around the place with different types of extraterrestrials, different animals being used, and you commingle, you crossbreed with animals, as it said in the early part of that video, we share the AB and A blood types with this series of simians. So as you crossbred them now, you create another set of issues that you've got to manage. Now, in certain times in our society, if you think about in the Americas, for example, when we were the Anasazi there ruling that lands, and in one instance where the Chinese came over and decided that they, on their travels, wanted to intermix with us at that particular point, there were certain rules stipulated at that point around mixing. So that intervention or mixing between us as the Anasazi, for example, and the Chinese under the Hu-Shen dynasty led to the formulation of the Hopi American Indians, or they classify American Indians today. But they weren't allowed to mix with other races. So they were only allowed to mix with dominant races, because if they mixed with other races who had more recessive trait, you create more recessive genes. So in that regard, they at least had some kind of system where they were trying to regulate the production of recessive genes within the human genome. But obviously the Dravidians came along, Travadu, and others came along and mixed in with the other Indians, creating further sub-races and more problems within the genome. So you can see, you can set rules and things where you try to regulate what's best for the human genome, but obviously others, in terms of being extraterrestrial or even terrestrial, will come along and go against your plans for order. Hence you have unnatural nature versus natural nature beings or individuals. Any questions? Because there was a lot of scientific information there, so if people need anything cleared up.
No questions from my side.
No questions.
So, as I say, you've had these three initial seeds, and the point at the bottom there, very important point. They're not the white race if they don't have Rh negative blood types. So if they're not Rh negative, then they're not pure. You understand, the pure white seed as you would have it You understand? So the three originals that we talked about earlier, you can see here these Caucasian women that were sent out, as we expressed a little bit earlier. So red hair, green eyes. The more popular probably on the planet, yellow fur, blue eyes, and white fur, white eyes, which you see less now because, or you don't even see at all in terms of pure seeded, almost left. Because, as I say, the Flugelrod started to intermingle with the Neanderthal and then other races with stronger genes, and eventually they got bred out of existence, so they didn't even last that long, but still introduced this Rh negative aspect into the, as I say, into the genome. Then, as I say, out of the first three, you get the dark fur, dark eyes, and then ivory skin, you understand, produced. So primarily there's 4 different types of hybrids in the main that we see now, and then obviously they've then gone out and mixed with other races, which have created then sub-races out of these hybrids. So your rhesus aspect comes because of this. So remember, we have 3 different types of shaggies that were sent here from the Sirius star constellation by the feminine of that, based in that particular star constellation, and sent them here. So that rhesus monkey is a recessive type gene, so obviously have produced that version, which they binded the genes with the Pleiadians on to produce Cro-Magnon. So as we've said previously, there are 6 sets of a gene pool, obviously, that the Mukasu in their story are coming from. So say Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Homo erectus, Homo bigensis, Denisovan, and then we've got the Homo sapien, understood? And so therefore we talk about 6 ether, Femi 6. The male themselves, as you know, the woman of their, or their feminine of them, the Fem 6 of their race, and subsequent species. Remember, she's vibrating on a higher vibrational level than the male, and therefore when she mixes with those with more dominant or stronger genes, then she transforms, or is able to then, as I say, shift, or she becomes on the higher vibrational level as a man. So as we've, I think, expressed before, 2 Nagaru coming together, Nagaru female, Nagaru male, Nagaru female coming together. Remember, both were produced star children. You understand? Obviously, when you've got a Nagaru male with a Caucasian female, they were known as the sons of God, let's use that term loosely. When you have a Nagaru female with a Mukasu or Caucasian male, then that produces a son of man. So basically, the Nagaru, or black woman, is obviously has the strongest genes on the planet, but she's also a shapeshifter. So she will drop her vibrational level down to match her man, obviously, and then when it was 2 Kakasnadu male and Kakasnadu female coming together, then they were considered in ancient times to be the sons of the devil. The devil, obviously, as we've expressed today, is not the mythological creature in the monotheistic religion, but it's to do with things that basically bad bacteria that cause diseases. Understood? Yeah, so as you know, that cleanliness is next to godliness. So the opposite of that obviously must be the devil then is associated with unhygienic practices, because they lead to diseases which you can't see. Like we're in this day and time, you can't see coronavirus. So, you know, the key kind of messaging, isn't it? Wash your hands for 20 seconds. You understand? Wear a mask, do whatever. It's all hygiene, isn't it? Cleaning, so on and so forth, because you can't see that hidden enemy. So that's what it relates to, as opposed to being some other things relating to germ diseases. Understood? So this is why you get that combination. So the male obviously is 5 ether, the lowest level of vibration of all of the races on the planet, and so she's going to lower her vibration to match his, and consequently it puts out her soul if it was lit. In order for it to be relit, she has to then be back with a man who has stronger genetics. Yeah. Now, obviously, the way the genes have been scrambled, there are a lot more people who are actually more Nagaru, because if they have one Nagaru gene or whatever through mixing within them, then they're Nagaru, but they don't see themselves as that mentally. Understood? So there's a lot more of the dominant genes spread around the place than there are the more recessive genes, although, as I say, they don't see themselves likely of that. So, whether they gravitate to the Wu-Sabat doctrine in time to a system to save themselves is probably highly unlikely. So the 6 ether and 5 ether, that's where you get those 11 tribes breakdown, which I said the Master said many years ago on a lecture. The 11 tribes of Canaan are symbolic of 11 different graftation projects. Well, that's where it relates to, say, 6 pools or 6 sets of genes that they come from or stem from in terms of these Adamites, let's say, RH negative from their overlords. So we understand that through the Vikings, which clearly is not Vikings, it's V1 kings, so 6 kingdoms of the Celtic clans came out of the caves and the hillsides. Obviously, you see one of them being the Caucasus Mountains or whatever, and basically raping and killing and stealing, as I think it's depicted. I haven't seen the show, but a show called Vikings, apparently, which is all about that behaviour. Understood? Very anti the rules. And as we see here, interesting enough, old school slide. This is basically how religion, remember, was spread with the sword. So that cross that you see there, obviously, is the very more famous sword, and how obviously their way of life or whatever was spread under duress. And so their kind of take, kill, beast-like mindset, as I say, prevailed through the world and caused, much devastation and conflict, say, around the planet. At the same time as spreading this hybrid or RH negative gene, which, as I say, today, when I watched the video, it's why actually, it's more about self-awareness into how that may work, but in that day and time, they wouldn't have had that kind of technology. So, so that the amount of diseases that would have been spread, people dying, not knowing what's going on, exchange of blood, mixing with certain individuals, this is a serious problem. So you get away with the firstborn being okay, but then subsequent children then being killed off as a result, as well as potentially as well, you can have obviously problems with that firstborn child as well, depending on the combination of the blood types, male and female. Now, so clearly that, as some of you may be more familiar with as well, obviously how the different lands that we see here, or the names of the countries, I should say, are evidence of the certain types of mixtures that were taking place in those regions. So where the word land generally appears, this is where I say they came out the mountains and housed these areas. And these are, say, some of the Germanic tribes we saw, clearly with the older barons being connected with the Germanic tribes, which are, say, after the first sort of 3 creations there. Obviously, they've gone off to then create, as I say, these 6 Viking kingdoms. And so they in-house out the mountains, in-house these particular areas, particularly in Scandinavia, but also Europe, as you know, much colder climates, certainly in Scandinavia, much more conducive for the genes that they inherited from their overlords. Understood? And this forms the basis primarily of the Celtic tribes today, or the king's men, as we mentioned earlier, the kind red, the red, the Moadamu or Adamites. Now, they went off and then encountered the Dravidians as they sort of were migrating more eastward, and so the Mukasu or Kakasnadu in updated Sabai, Kakasnadu or Caucasoid, plus the Indian Dravidian, who were known as Tans. That combination now puts a tan on the end of the country, you understand? And this is where you get the word Aryan. So Aryan basically means Eastern or East Indian. This was it's making reference to. So Caucasians calling themselves Aryans as a pure seed is actually talking about it's all about the East Indians, the Dravidians, and that's what it relates to. And this combination is they were known as the Tans. Understood? So here you get the country names with Tan on the end. Yeah, so again, understanding context, or the Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn or Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, setting context for the world today. What other teacher is breaking this stuff down for you as Nagaranadu and even the world to know what was taking place back then? Because if the Mukasu or Kakasnadu, the Caucasians, have their way, all this stuff will be wiped from history. Yeah, wiped away, because they don't want to see themselves, or he was created as a disease, or what are 3 things. He's slave labor, he was created for, food, you understand, as the second point, as then what their purpose is in life. So he doesn't want the world to know that's why he was created or weaponized in that regard, as we touched upon it in the last class. So again, we can see here that the red mark on their forehead is that, as I say, that mark from Cain, as you see it there in the subtext there, and symbolically, as I say, this is the passing of those blood types carried over from the combination of the Pleiadians, per se, and then obviously later down the line the Anunnaki, which led to the formulation of the designer gene. And then you've got the this Indo-European, so this new type of hybrid, this Tan has now then gone out and started then mixing with other groups, or setting up itself in other lands. And where this new hybrid then resided, these lands had the name Ia on the end of the country names. It's understood. And so we see that again today. So you've got, obviously, remember, you've got 2 kind of sets of situations there. One coming out from the Caucasus Mountains, and then obviously a little bit further down the line. Remember, they kept a certain group of them when a certain war took place and certain destruction was taking place. This is later down the line in Durumkuyu. You understand those caves that you see in Turkey underground? They kept a number of them. Who eventually, as I say, you had the diseased aspects of that group, and then you had the ones who were clean, and the ones who were clean then obviously were let out, obviously, to go and mix in, or commanded, one might say, to go and mix in with other different races. So you've got almost 2 sets of terror of mixing in with the human genome at a certain point. So the IA countries are where this new hybrid that was created, or the Tans, that were created then when it housed these areas. Yeah, so again, how would you know this? You wouldn't know. This is the context being set by the fact that you've got a being who was there, which was here, as he constantly reminds us to state. Any questions?
No questions.
No questions.
Okay, so the Flugelrod story, as you know, is associated with the Nation of Islam, and that is what it's talking about. So Yaqub grafted devil is the basic creation of the Flugelrods, which then led to multiple different hybrids being created. We see a similar story with Jacob and the separating of the sheep, symbolically in the Bible, where he tried to trick Laban out of his flock by using, as I say, spotted versus clear sheep, or kind of creating, say, more of a certain type of sheep, so he could take more of his flock. I'd say these are the so-called holy people of the Bible, murdering, deceiving people, raping. You understand? So very, very much Viking-like behaviour, as we're seeing there. Now, so clearly, as I say, more food, more stock for their overlords, as it's saying at the top there, which eventually was disease to try and kill off some of these draconians a little bit later. So, as you know, a little bit further down the line, when the Anunnaki got involved, so this is after Cro-Magnon, so further down the line, we did 6,000 years ago. Then remember DUF 20, and the introduction of what's being referred to as a designer gene is where you then have simian. Obviously, you've got Homo porcine, Homo simian, and Homo canine introduced. Now, generally speaking, as we say, that you have to have even sets of numbers in order for them to the intermixing to be able to work. But obviously, the Anunnaki had 47 chromosomes, so obviously part of the problem that created is, remember, with that introduction of that, you got trisomy 21, where obviously you got 3 copies of the chromosome, or this adverse chromosome, which obviously leads to Down syndrome. So obviously part of this interaction with these now created some problems in the human genome overall. But the designer gene, with this combination that they introduced into this Muadamu, was basically, as I say, to lead a level of control. So they kept the mindset no longer able, because of the simian gene in there. Remember, a chimpanzee or monkey or certain types of simian, their brain capacity obviously is far inferior to that of a human being, but they do have intelligence and have the ability to get up to about, in this stage, 3 to 6 years, but really showing that in terms of this design, the maximum age they could reach mentally for a human being is 13. So we see in our society today, because it's obviously patriarchal in nature, so it's the mind of the European that you see. What do we see in our society in terms of entertainment? We see a lot of emphasis on superheroes, Marvel kind of movie, all kind of kid stuff, Star Wars, the biggest grossing films. People getting upset because the movie's not been made properly, or they cast a woman in the role of one of the main characters, a man, or they cast a black person in the name of the main character. People getting hyped, dressing up as basically they're playing children as adults. Obviously, the gaming, nothing wrong with particularly playing games, but gaming is one of the biggest industries in the world in terms of internet use. So these things reflected in society today. What do we see? We see sport, a lot of conflict. Sport is competitive. Yes, we may think, well, when we're reading that in our part of Act, for example, it says, well, we don't compete as Sabaeans, we don't compete in terms of sports and all that. Well, you can kind of see why, because the competition, the stress, etc., creates more adrenaline in the bloodstream, which obviously seasons up the meat for the food. So there are certain things, as I say, in this society which you can see are based upon some of these characteristics coming out of the design. So we live in a very childlike society, and this is why we end up with a lot of wars, because it's not easy for children, let's be honest, to resolve conflict situations. They don't have the kind of expansive mind sometimes to resolve certain types of situations, so we end up in a fight. Understood? So this is what you're seeing here in terms of that design, and for them, for the overlords, it's just a case of where they fought, let's say, it will be easier to control them, so hence they didn't give them their full brain capacity, but rather try to limit them. But obviously they've utilised that and been able to take over the world, hence why we have the kind of world that we see is self-centred, in that regard, self-preservationist, racist in that regard, because their overlords didn't want them to mix in. At a certain point, they wanted to keep the certain genes a certain way, pure. So if you look in their Bible, racism is introduced, isn't it? For them not to mix in, certainly to keep certain genes pure, but at the same time, remember, they had to mix in order to, because of their recessive genes at certain points, they have to mix in. So they let some women come out and mix in. It doesn't mean they're letting the whole race get mixed out of existence. Do you see what I'm saying? So, you get those sort of advances in that regard. So DUF 1220, the designer gene, is a more recent addition with the monothe of 6,000 years ago. And it was matched, as I say, to the axis of the planet at 23 and a half chromosome mix there. Now, sorry, any questions?
No questions.
Yeah, there is a question.
Oh.
Yeah, there is a question. Let me see. It's from Colin. And it says the Anunnaki had 47 chromosomes, but aren't the Anunnaki made up of multiple species? Which species are we referring to in this instance?
So in this type, who were involved in that project, you're talking about the Anuna. So the humanoid Anunnaki.
Yeah, there's another question. Where did the Anunnaki get their 47 generic names from?
I'm not aware of that, so I can't answer that question. Yeah, so maybe that's something I have to look into. I'm not aware of the 47 generic names. So unless anybody else on here who's a student can clarify that, I'm not aware of that, so I can't answer that. So something I'll look into. If they could give us a reference, that would be good, please. Any other question?
Go on.
No, I said no further questions from me.
So is that the same?
No further questions.
None at the moment. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so you can give us a reference for that and try and pick that up for next week. As we showed earlier, I think I showed earlier on the diagram, as I say, you can see with the interceptions who was being utilised. So in part one, we showed you the 7 birth mothers, and I remember Inky and his partner, isn't it, Hisat. In her sag, obviously, was used with the 7 birth mothers, and then, as I say, Ningish Zida was a geneticist working on it who tried to make everything work together. So, as I say, their 47 was used more, as I say, to align it with the axis of the planet. As I say, because it wasn't an even number, it created problems. As I say, trisomy 21, I think it's called, which is Down syndrome, is one of the issues with that arose from that combination. So just make sure. Yeah, on the 21st chromosome. Now, so we talked, I think in a previous class, maybe sort of late last year, about the trigger words for the demise of their 6,000 years. Yep. So in Revelations 9:11, you get two of the words in there, which is Abaddon and Apollyon. And then, as I say, when 9/11 happened, you get Osama bin Laden there with Abu Din. So these three trigger words, basically, once mentioned, as I say, would bring an end to the destruction of them within the chromosome, within their telomerase. So it would start, obviously, where we have telomeres on the end of chromosomes, which, as you know, they determine how many times cells will replicate within the human body. So remember, you go through various different changes every 7 years of the body completely rebuilding itself from within. Understood? So depending on your age, I think if you divide it by 7, that'll tell you how many times, obviously, that's happened thus far. But when you talk about telomerase, that's dealing with the species. That's dealing with the wider set. So the trigger point to bring the species to an end was by way of, as I say, these three words. So trigger tones, yeah. And so, as I say, what you have to understand is that many of the different secret societies which are out there are executing the work of their overlords. So the Hellfire Club, which is linked to the Bohemian Grove activities that take place at Bohemian Grove, and the Skull and Bones Society as well. As I say, are interested in, say, executing, say, many of the activities necessary or understanding, as I say, one, the requirement, as I say, in this instance, when the Na came, because they sought an extension of time, remember, from the Pleiadians, but the Pleiadians, because of the activities that they had been involved in, the Mukasu, that is, or the Caucasian, one of those, as I say, being the enslavement of the Nagar-Nadu in the last 400 years. It was just too much trouble, as they saw it, for them. So they abandoned them, and so they were left to the devices of the Draconians, who, as you'll be aware of, wanted 300,000 bodies per day from them to produce as food between 2000 and 2012 into 13. So they're executing, as I say, many of the wishes, so to speak, of their extraterrestrial overlords who abandoned them. And this new set in particular, as I say, are interested in removing these hybrids, as they see, these problematic hybrids who can't be controlled, can't be reformed. Their thing is to remove them from the planet. Now, one of the things that we talked about here was obviously these your extraterrestrials on the left-hand side of your Bible in various different shapes and forms, as we talked about and touched upon in various ways, as we showed you on the diagram of the evolution of the Sands people, so all Rh negative. And then one of the things that the Masters obviously break it down is clearly we've had various different blood diseases introduced into the human genome. So we talked last week about the War of the Roses, and how that ties into slavery, the Order of the Red Rose and Order of the White Rose. And so, as you can see there, we've got vampires in terms of the hemophiliacs, and then plasma lusters. So not just, but plasma lusters, excuse me, in terms of the, vampires in terms of the hemophiliacs, and then we've got plasma lusters. So those who need plasma within our blood, as I say, to cure certain illnesses and diseases, coronavirus now being one of those. Now, all the presidents since Washington are all related by blood. I'm sure some of you are more familiar with this, and obviously kept between certain orders, isn't it? So you've got the Order of the Skull and Bones, and then you've got the Order of the Eagles. You understand? So you've got two different orders there, with each of the presidents being one of those. Interestingly, with Obama, because they don't allow blacks in either of those. But his mother would have been Rh negative. So all of these individuals who are present, certainly between them, are Rh negative bloodlines, in line with these extraterrestrials, as well as you see some interesting characters there, the royal family, President Putin, and as we see there, the JFK's so-called assassin, and his Russian wife, so links obviously to Russia there, all Rh negative, Obama's wife. So here they consider that Rh negative, remember, blue blood, understood, to be that pure seed. You understand, that pure seed. And say part of the release of the virus, which interestingly is mentioned within the Harvest book directly, saying that many of the things obviously they tried previously, and we'll touch on that next week, that it's tried have not worked. So the virus was predicted to come, many years before this book was in there. People obviously missed it, but obviously we're living in a time where they're trying to take out, as I say, these hybrids who they consider to be, impure. So the White Brotherhoods, connected to here, you see in Luciferian Conspiracy, the master teacher obviously is speaking about the type of infiltration that happened within the Euro-Masonic ranks, and how, as I say, they failed to it was infiltrated, let's say, not only by what people would refer to as the Illuminati, but specifically when you talk about Albert Pike, Albert Mackey, and these types of individuals, remember, they are coming from an individual born in the 13th century by way of Albert Magnus. Yeah? Albert Magnus, his name translates as the Great Illumination, tying back into the fire, of the illuminated ones. When we talk about illumination, they're not talking about the black light of illumination, they're talking about the amber light of fire, taking them back to their number one individual of the Anunnaki, named Nana. See, his name means master of fire. You understand? This is what it's taking it back to. So the pure seeded hybrid, remember, which they're looking for, remember that original one that was produced in the image and after the likeness, obviously, of those Pleiadians. That's the pure one, obviously, that they see as pure, seeded with the Rh negative blood type, as you can see at the bottom there, blue blood or cold-blooded individuals. So see why certain reptiles or reptilian species, for example, align with that, as well as clearly the Pleiadians in terms of their look, coming from, as I say, a cold planetary climate. So you've got two brotherhoods. So the Order of the White Brotherhood, the White Brotherhood, as it's speaking about Luciferian Conspiracy, and it is the infiltration of the Euro-Masonic classes, whatever, to take over and introduce or change the nature of Masonry to the worship of Nana, and obviously then you've got the certain roots, isn't it, which is the vampire root and the lichen root as part of that. Understood? So when they talk about order of Seth, understand, which ties back to Set. Now in our culture, we understand clearly that the Set and Osiris stories as they have them, remember, are symbolic, but as the master pointed out, Set couldn't have been negative if the two of them came from the same mother and father. And then if you check from their mother and father then up to Atum, there's no intermixing or interception of the genome. So if they're all agreeable and all positive, then where could the negativity come in? Because there was no intermixing externally from the genes. So in our story of the real events, we know what took place. Obviously, in the story of others who have then taken our story, then they create this level of opposition. And in times past, even in our culture, as more foreigners came in and it became more mixed, then the story of the kind of opposition, has become more extreme. I mean, in actuality, we understand it to be, representing will, or as I say, the two different the relationship between the human body, between obviously conscious, subconscious, or voluntary and involuntary systems within the human body. You understand, in terms of this dichotomy between the two sides, of how we end up making decisions, called will. Now, why when it ties with Seth? Because Seth, if you look at his picture, or one depiction of him, this kind of greyhound-looking creature with white faces. So even back then, it was understood. So he became associated, not that he became associated with foreigners. Understood? And was depicted with, you can't see it here because it's in black and white, but red hair and shown with green eyes, and you can see there with the white face. So even back then, we had an understanding of hybrids, obviously, that have been introduced into the human genome artificially, and were known as a result of understanding who and what they were to cause chaos, were troublemakers, and were a problem, understood, within society. So, our thing was to kind of stay away from them, but they were a problem, clearly, within the environment. Versus, as I say, the Black Brotherhood of Anubu, or Anubis, or Anupu, which represented natural nature beings, in our case, black, normal, not hybrid, naturally, obviously, occurring. So the white hybrids, the Hellfire Club, little known about it, but obviously exists here. We see here a meeting at Bohemian Grove, and we see some interesting characters here. Well, before was Ronald Reagan here and Richard Nixon, obviously before they became president. Obviously at this retreat, linking with members of the Hellfire Club, and we understand obviously one of their symbols there. The owl, and weaving spiders come not here, or something like that. I think is one of their terms that they use. We see obviously the owl and both the spider interwoven on the back of the dollar bill as part of the symbols to them. Now, as I say, the White Brotherhood that links to those Levitical priesthood. Remember, we talked about them in the last class, about them being at that time, they're the origin really of or part of that white brotherhood being spoken about, in a sense of doing the work of those extraterrestrials, gathering the food. I remember getting the flock to commit evil acts, producing adrenaline, because when you're looking at the books of Leviticus, you are looking at an extraterrestrial menu book. And so these, through them, as I say, as you can see there, the destruction of our knowledge centers and libraries around the world. This is why fire is seen as that source of liberation for them, because their ways of mythology, introducing opposite way of rules and working, finds itself having some foundation by destroying what came before them. You understand? And they still continue to do that today. So the major library, in Alexandria, thousands, probably millions of years of accumulated knowledge has been lost, and clearly that has an impact on the development of the world today by way of this white brotherhood, whose only purpose is to ingratiate themselves to these overlords, and say have a self-destructive mentality. Hence why in these societies today we have consumers and producers, how they separate the world today, because they are overlords, as you'd be familiar with. I believe that there's too many people populating the planet Earth, too many people populating, and so the Earth should have a population of around 500,000. So obviously 6-7 billion people on the planet, they see that excess as useless eaters or whatever, or consumers, and wish to, let's say, reduce the population down for their purposes, but the planet doesn't belong to them. Now, so as I say, Satut was associated with foreigners, not that he himself was negative, but he became associated with foreigners because, he was associated with environments like the desert. There's wild animals in the desert, very dangerous, etc. And they knew the impact of, as I say, foreigners coming in, as we see depicted on the walls of Seti I. We can see the graftation projects that led to the different races, as obviously is depicted on those walls. The brown man, we can see here, the ghost station, the black, the brown, and so on, we can see yellow, and we can see the either a ghost station or being, as we can see there, representing various different types of hybrids in the sand. So you can see the various different races as a result of all this different activity going on by extraterrestrials, recorded on the walls in ancient Egypt now. So you can see even back then genetic manipulation is taking place, or has led to the development of different types of physical ethers, or different types of species, as I say, of humanoid on the planet Earth today. So, any questions? Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Right, the Smithsonians, they are attributed to hiding a lot of ancient artifacts. So are they part of this secret society what was destroying the knowledge?
I don't have any knowledge directly of them, so that's more of a could be or something to look into. But yeah, I mean, part of these brotherhoods, remember, interesting enough, I think we showed him in part 1 of where, remember the dino, the Homosaurus, the one that was connected to the human beings, was found. It was found in Alberta, Canada. You understand? So this is one of the places where the White Brotherhood was started, isn't it? Yeah. Going back to their date it's considered to be the date, although we know it relates to Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, but 1776. So it's interesting that it started there, where the bones of the Homosaurus, i.e. the reptilian intervention, was started. So that brotherhood in various different forms, yes, would keep up some of those ancient ways, which was to establish themselves, remember, as the authority of information on the planet. As Master obviously expressed, we taught them, only taught them 2 degrees out of the original 9. Obviously, they created a third themselves, and to establish themselves as the authority, which they have done, as you know, the connected words are author, authority, authentic. So if you have enough authors, you decide, you become the authority, and you decide what is or what isn't authentic. So in order to establish that, then they need to remove other information sources which clearly are contrary to the version of history that they want to present to the world. So this is why Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn is a problem, because them not wanting to say, oh, we were food or we were weaponized, we were a made individual, goes against what they've been putting on their televisions, you understand, for however many years, and giving this kind of white supremacist or white superiority view of themselves to the world, when in actuality they are the weak and wicked man by design. You understand? So there are many involved in that. I'm not familiar with the Smithsonian's, but obviously you can look that up. But it more than likely it's a combination of that involvement with various different institutions. As I say, in the book called The Decision, it shows you a picture of the various different symbols of secret societies that are connected to extraterrestrials. So I'm not sure, maybe check that and see if the Smithsonian's one is sitting in there as well.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No
further questions.
So, as we talked about earlier, the reptilians and the Pleiadians, Mutananu, I think Mutananu there should be another N there. Mukma'u, the Pleiadians, they are interested in the pure seed, RH, pure seeds, not the hybrid. So their interest is to, as I say, remove as many of these mixed hybrid genes as possible. Hence why, we go into this a bit more in next week's class, hence why you're seeing, isn't it, world over, ancestry.dna.com and different genetic collecting banks, so to speak, appealing to people's ego to say, well, find out who you are. But obviously, in exchange for your genetic information, they tell you, oh, you're connected to this tribe, etc., etc. But they're gathering a genetic bank of information. Now, two things going on here. So they want to track where these Rh negative seeds are, and obviously then wipe out those who are the kind of impure or the mixed hybrids. Now, the dark fur, dark-eyed, the plan is to leave those so that they intermingle them with the natural existing races which are there, because obviously you've got dark hair, dark eyes, you've got some element of Nagarnadu or Negroid in you as a result of that, and so they could mesh in or be absorbed in with the existing natural races, obviously, which are proposed to remain post 2060. Understood? So so it becomes a tracking system for these Rh negative or the pure seeded blood types, and then wipe out the rest. Obviously, the plan with the creating this hybrid American Negro and imposter type individual, probably more in Europe, is because obviously with that mindset, in their image, looking like us, but in our image, but obviously in the mindset of the Makasu, remember, it creates a walking blood bank for them, basically, for their diseases, for the plasma needed, for blood needed, etc., by having us around. So, let's say, because our servicing is to them under the mindset of those different religions that we spoke about earlier. So this is a number of things going on, I say, to keep us spellbound, not keep us knowing what's going on. But I say the sacrifices of Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn over the years and still even today is seeking to keep us as a people ahead of the game, keep us ahead of what's going on. And as I say, the mature conversations today, forget about the Star Treks and the Star Wars, etc., is that extraterrestrials are behind these things which are going on and various different interventions taking place, particularly with COVID or COVID-19. So, as we know, the genes have been scrambled, and in terms of the hybrids, and many years the Master talked about the neutrinoids, so the combination of taking the best, I say, of all of the different races. So the genes have been scrambled. So this hybrid identification is not as easy or straightforward as it may appear, hence why they want the analysis of individuals' blood. Clearly coronavirus testing as well provides an opportunity for the gathering of these genetic pools of information. But as I say, you're sending information to ancestry.com and places like that. That's what it's being used for. It's creating these pools of information. And as we know with the neutrinoids, they appear in a certain way where you can't tell what race they're from. Do you understand? And we're seeing this combination even more. So the hybrid trait, as we can see here in other races, we can see here that the eye there, when you look to the left or right, your eye should be in the same position in the eye. So his other eye should be in the corner there. But as you can see, it's one of the eyes is stuck in the middle. So this is a hybrid trait. To identify hybrids there. I'm sorry, Kevin, but this is one of those traits there. So you see them intermingled into the society, as we see now, and even some of us, even on the phone, on the call, may have these hybrid traits or whatever the case may be, because of the type of intermixing that has taken place over the years. Understood. So interesting. I think he was in an interview with Joe Rogan talking about the Michael Jordan documentary, and the first few minutes of that conversation were quite interesting. Although he says it was explains it was he was joking, or it was a comparison, I should say, but it was quite interesting the way it was said. So you're familiar with that. I'm explaining the traits there, and as I say, this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing more and more. Remember, under alternative 1, 2, and 3, remember they wanted to reduce down the population of the planet so they could repopulate with hybrids. And as we're seeing this, neutrinoids, which is the best of every race, obviously, to be able to have their mind, but be able to have sufficient melanin to protect them from the more harmful UV rays of the sun, to be able to still reside on the surface of the planet. Understood. But as with all of this, I'd say, ridding of the hybrids, leaving the more dominant races on the planet to continue life. Okay, all right. So I think that's where we're at for today. Any other questions?
No questions.
And there's no questions.
Okay, well, amazingly finished right on time, pretty much. So thank you for attending today. We'll be back next week with the last part of this. So go into a bit more into some of the Bigfoot stuff. Bring a few more things from bloodlust and religion, and tie it up, as I say, with a few more subjects we need to sort of cover, and the role of the master teacher, which is very important, actually, in what is taking place right now, and how we need to progress and move forward with all these different agendas going on. Ultimately, our ancestral agenda in terms of Panatharu and the Morozaku is the one that we need to be cognizant of as well, and what we need to do to be in line with our ascension pathway, as well as being aware of what everybody else, the fate of everybody else on the planet. Okay, if there's no other questions, then we're going to close for today. As I say, appreciate everybody's joining us on the Zoom platform as well as on Facebook, and we will see you the same time next week, which I believe is March the 27th for another Outformation class. Okay, take care. Wadu. It's everybody to take care. Bye bye.